Welcome to Table Talk, the place for deep conversations in the Geekverse. And trust me, when we tear into a subject, we go deep. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. Each episode, I'll be talking with one or more creators, authors, illustrators, publishers, or other movers and shakers in games, TV, books, movies, or other areas of the Geekverse. Regular guests include Douglas A. Burton, the author of Faraway Bird, a multi-award-winning historical fiction novel of the Byzantine Empress Theodora. He's also the author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, an alternative story structure to the hero's journey that often occurs in stories with feminine heroes. That structural framework frequently comes up in our analysis of story. Brianna De Silva, she's the director and co-writer of The Cultists, a Lovecraftian comedy mockumentary-style web show here on YouTube. And the author of The City of Reckoning, an epic fantasy novel of political intrigue, the ethics of war, and young love. Cameron Pasha is a screenwriter, director, novelist, and was a writer and producer on the series Kings, a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman, and a co-producer and writer for Sleeper Cell. He's also written for the CW series Nikita and Roswell, New Mexico. He's been breaking news from inside Lucasfilm, Disney, and Hollywood. His analysis and commentary have become very popular on YouTube. We regularly meet to discuss and analyze stories, and when we do, we dive into graduate-level seminars on story structure and writing. Come on in and let's go deep. And when I say we're going deep, I mean you'd better bring your hard suit. Other guests have included Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels Once Upon a Unicorn, the creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and the author of Star Wars: A Pirate's Price, the book that explains why the Millennium Falcon is on the planet Batu at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Mark Tassin, the creator of the World of Ataltis, head of Mechanical Muse, former director of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. Let's see, who else?
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. Not yet. Maybe soon, though. But I have interviewed Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games, crowdfunder extraordinaire, and publisher of many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. Brian Colin, sculptor of the world of Revelo Monster Busts, and the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG. Ajit George, the Dungeons & Dragons author. We talked about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and the development of the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel.
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, the commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Well, actually, that interview got rather spicy, so I think I'd better just keep that one to myself. Kate Wilson, a YouTuber, actress, host, and prolific geek guru who's now working to make a new show dedicated to the world of tabletop gaming a reality. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride, because it's time to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and all of geekdom through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's so good to have you here. Welcome to my house. Welcome to the office. Welcome to Table Talk. We have got a very special guest tonight. We have taken a look at many of his books on the morning grind, on storytelling, story structure, and all of that, which is one of the things that we absolutely love to talk about on both channels, on Heath's Geekverse and here on Table Talk. Please welcome Adron J. Smitley. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Thank you very much, Heath, for having me on again.
It is fantastic to have you here. So we are here to go deep into lots of things story related. But first, do you want to introduce yourself? Let everybody know who you are, and I'll bring up your books on the screen so people can check them out.
Okay, I've been writing since I was a kid, but when I started taking it seriously a little while ago. I'm author of the To Toot My Own Horn, the award-winning best-selling Soothsayer series, fantasy series. I've written a whole bunch of, here's my Rec Club series of books, a whole bunch of books on how to plot, about characters, story structure. I've been obsessed with plot for the longest time once I started taking writing serious. And I didn't, before that, I knew nothing about plot. And once I discovered plot, it just blew my mind. It just became an obsession of mine. So, and the reason why I write the books is because I'm condensing years into hours. You know, so that way I can save you years of learning stuff about plot that took me years to learn. It's only going to take you a couple hours. You know, I want to help writers out. So, and I also, by the way, I write under I write under pen names. I actually have about 10 times the amount of stuff published under pen names that I do my own name. So I mean, I got I got tons of stuff published. You know, so yeah, I typically just under my name I do my fantasy and then my plot books. All my other stuff I write under pen names. I actually had a more successful one of my pen names in particular. One of them I actually write. One of the things is erotica. That's actually, but I make money off that every day. I mean, that sells and gets tons of reads like crazy. But I put that under a pen name, obviously, because some people assume, oh, he writes erotica, so all of his stuff must have erotica. And it doesn't. That's the only thing that has something like that. You know, I also have a whole thing for how I can teach people how to write erotica just like that, because I came up with the whole formula and everything. And you know, so if anybody's interested in that, you know, or in the novel consultation, because I doubt you want to get into that on your stream, I can teach them erotica real quick. You know, it's really easy to write. But I do tons of stuff under my pen names, all kinds of genres.
Okay, well, we might also have to talk about that, because I've heard people or people say, hey, you know, get into erotica, or people who want to get into that. And then, but I don't know, you know, some people, well, everybody always says, there's a group of people who says that something is always easy. So that is one thing that you hear from people. Oh yeah, the erotica area is easy, and people are just gobbling that up. But I never know if that's actually true or not. I've been trying to put the links to all the books in the comments here.
Yeah, I wasn't really into erotica before that. I just happened to be good at writing it, because every time I would write romance scenes and stuff and all my other stuff, one of the things I'd have to do is I'd always have to tame it down, because I get very descriptive and stuff like that. But I don't want to be putting that in my other stuff. And then one day I'm like, maybe we should try writing erotica. So I spent 3 months doing nothing. I shelved everything else, and I just became obsessed with it. You know, all day, every day, I was just reading it and writing it and researching it. And then I came up with this formula for it. Easy formula. And within the first hour of publishing my first stuff, it was selling. Oh, wow. And it's been selling every day ever since. You know, that was like December 6th or 7th of last year for when I started that. And I make my most money off of my erotica, actually. And it's erotica short stories. So, I mean, you can bang out one short story a week if you want or something. And, you know, you're going to be, at the very least, you'll be making money through like KU reads or something if you go through Amazon KDP or something. You know, it's very easy to write, because erotica is, nobody's reading erotica to read Shakespeare. And if 90% of erotica you're going to read, it's full of all kinds of spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes, but the readers don't care. What they care about is a particular fetish that you're writing about, you know.
Say hello. Hey, James is here. James is here. Sable Phoenix is here as well. I see in the comments here. Yes, James had a great suggestion here that I went over to your author's page and did put a link to your author's page. That's a great way to do it as well. So you can always, if you're not on a lot of social media right now, but you can follow on the author's page. If you follow the author's page on Amazon, you would know when stuff is coming out under, at least under this name, right? So that's a great thing to do, and that should be able to get you to all of those books. So right now, the Right Club series, this is the one that we
kind of forget about that because I'm so in that.
Yeah, so the Right Club right now, you've turned actually all those free at the moment, right? It's got 6 books in the series, on Kindle. We looked at Stomping Kittens, Punching Babies. So you've turned these free right now. So if you want to get these free, check them out right now. Go to the links, download them, and even some of those 2 fantasy novels. So thank you very much.
I'm not sure if they're free right now. I know that I have them set so that by specific time, all day Friday, they'll be free.
Okay. Well, it looks like. Well, no, that
sure
might say. Oh, no, that might say
when it begins. But it's like.
Okay, so then maybe tomorrow. It does say this looks like it said it looked like it was free to me, but it says $0 with Kindle Unlimited or $2.99 to buy. So tomorrow they'll go free. Okay, so if you're watching here, make sure you save the link and get them free tomorrow.
Yeah.
Excuse me, or if you are watching on replay. All right. Well, you mentioned this in brief, but let's start here then. So why did you get into writing? And then what got you into all of this story analysis and all this plot? you put tons of stuff out?
I love making stuff up. Like every kid loves making stuff up. Kids love playing pretend. And I just, the only thing that really separates writers from everybody else is, everybody makes stuff up and imagines stuff like that. Writers just take the time to write it down. And I would do that as a little kid, but I would always have it as just kind of a hobby. I never took it serious for the longest time. It was just something fun to do. I never considered myself to ever become an author for the longest time. And then a while ago, I decided that I actually wrote a book. It was originally called My Brother's Keeper. I then rewrote the technical part of it, and it's now Kinslayer, but it's the exact same story. But I wrote that just to have copies for myself and for like my friends and family and stuff like that. I was just handing it out, and it was just something fun to do. It was a little short story I wrote that turned into a whole friggin' book. And then over the years, people were like, I was running into people, or people I knew were running into people that happened to, the book was spreading around, and people were like, oh yeah, I really like it. When's it come out with this next book and all this and that? And after so many times, I'm like, maybe I should actually start trying to write, and then so that's what got me started. And then I'm a kind of 100% all or nothing type of person. And so when I decided to start taking it actually serious, I immediately researched anything and everything writing. Because, I said before in your morning grind, I dropped out of high school at 15. It's not like I went to college and got all kinds of degrees in writing or nothing like that. So I'm all self-taught when it comes to that stuff, other than elementary school English or something. And so if I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm living proof that if you're watching right now and you think you're a bad writer, first of all, you're not, because don't get down on yourself. Everybody starts as a bad writer. I don't care who they are. The secret to becoming a good writer and eventually a great writer is real simple. You read and write every day for hours, every day for years. It may take you 1 year, may take you 20 years, anywhere in between. But if you're a bad writer, you can eventually become a good writer by doing that. That's the secret formula, the secret magic pill, or whatever you want to call it. That's all it is hard work and dedication. It's just a lot of people aren't really willing to put in that hard work. There's a lot of people, they go to write a book and then they realize halfway through, they're like, oh man, this is actually a lot of work. So you have to like it or love it, however. But yeah, I started getting writing into writing like that. And once I came across plot, I became obsessed with it because I have always been a movie buff, and I've always loved taking notebooks when I'd watch movies, and I would write down I started noticing after you watch a certain amount of movies that certain things happen in certain genres. And once I noticed that, I started writing them down. And then I had these stacks of notebooks filled with all this stuff. And here I was learning about plot without even knowing anything about plot. And then I came across the whole Blake Snyder beat sheet thing, and I mashed them up. Like, oh, these are like the exact same thing. What the heck's going on here? Obviously, I'm not the only one. So then I started researching plot and all that stuff. And I changed some of my names for my plot points and all that other stuff because I didn't know nothing about that when I was writing down those scenes for dissecting movies and stuff like that. And that's what really kind of got me started on my journey for learning about plot. And then like I said, it became my obsession. It's still my obsession to this day. Every day I'm reading something about plot or researching because I find it so fascinating because stories, regardless of how much of a pantser or plotter you are, stories need to have some sort of structure because all plot really is you're applying logic to your story so that it makes sense. A great metaphor for it is that consider your story a joke, okay? And what you're really doing when you're telling somebody a joke is you're telling them the setup, you're hitting them with a punchline. They get the joke and they laugh. It's funny. That's a well-plotted story. Kind of the difference here between plotters and pantsers comes into play. Pantsers, because they think in a collage of ideas, they tend to go, well, I want this to happen at some point, this to happen at some point, this to happen at some point. But they don't know where, when, or why, or how. That's typically a pantser's problem. And a plotter, they kind of give you a series of linear events with some plot holes. A pantser will kind of take a setup from one joke and then a punchline from another joke because they have this artistic vision that they don't really realize that they don't really go together. And then they tell you the joke, and then when you don't laugh, they go, well, why aren't you laughing? And you go, well, the joke's not funny because the punchline doesn't match the setup. Well, the plotting helps the punchline to match the setup. I was actually working with someone on a novel consultation because I've done a couple since I started, and essentially this will lead into us talking about Star Wars if you want. Essentially what we did was we wrote A New Hope, Star Wars A New Hope. So think of the first 95% of the story is the setup. We'll just call it the setup, even though that's not technically the setup for this instance. We wrote the first 95% of it. I actually kind of wrote it for them because they came in, they were a total pantser and they had a couple ideas, but they weren't sure. So we really worked it out. And so we basically get up to the point where Luke Skywalker, he's about to embrace his faith in the Force and all that stuff and blow up the Death Star. And then I'm like, okay, well, that's great. You have your first 95% of your story is a triumphant protagonist story. It fits all the beats, the midpoint, the anchor point, the punch point, the Rubicon, plot, everything is triumphant protagonist. Then we get to the climax. I'm like, well, let's figure out the details of the climax because we know this is going to happen. The triumphant protagonist is going to overcome the external antagonist. And then, and they're like, oh, no. What I want, I envisioned, though, that my protagonist they actually turn out to be a tragic protagonist. And so, in essence, what they were saying is they wanted Darth Vader to blow up the Death Star. All of a sudden, Luke's about to hit that button, and all of a sudden his X-wing gets bumped aside, and here pulls up Darth Vader, and he goes, "No, I'm gonna blow up the Death Star," and then he blows up the Death Star, and then he gets the medal from Princess Leia and roll credits. And it took me a while to explain to them, your punchline doesn't match your setup, so that's not going to work. You know what I mean? You can't just have a 95% setup of a triumphant protagonist and then just hit him with a tragic protagonist climax, because the Rubicon determines the climax, and you have this a triumphant protagonist Rubicon, so you have to have a triumphant protagonist climax. Otherwise, ergo the joke won't be funny, the story won't work. And that kind of is a perfect example of the whole joke metaphor thing.
Let me, before I forget, because I almost did, that you are giving away a free story consultation to people tonight who are watching here on the stream. I already put this link in the stream, but I want to put this again right here. So if you are here, Sable is saying that, right up here, Sable says, as someone who did a story workshop consultation with Adron, I can say he's very generous. Take advantage of that opportunity. So Sable is very complimentary of what he got out of this workshop. So if you would like one, we're going to give one away. Go ahead and hit the link, put your name and email address in right there. Well, that way you can also be in contact with Adron later on if you want to do a story consultation, but we'll draw it for free here. Remind me a couple of times throughout the stream to bring that up again for anybody else who might be coming in, and then we'll draw at the end and give somebody a free story consultation. Very generous also. Thank you, Adron. Okay, so you were talking about then flipping the let's go into tragic protagonist then, or Star Wars, a tragic protagonist, however you want to go with that. That was actually, when you talk about Star Wars and the tragic protagonist, that was something that I had come up with in another book that I was reading, and it was trying to explain with Star Wars how you would do Star Wars as a tragic protagonist, but it wasn't all that well developed. It wasn't all that well developed in that particular book. But he did say that, okay, if the message of that movie is that you need to choose faith, the Force, over technology. So it's the Force over technology. And so Luke does that in the end, turns off his targeting computer, trusts in the Force, and blows up the Death Star. If he was going to be a tragic protagonist, you would still want the message of that story to be the same. Faith is the right answer. The Force is the right answer. Technology is the wrong answer. If he rebuffs Obi-Wan Kenobi and keeps his targeting computer on, he's going to have to miss, and the Death Star, but then he's going to have to suffer the consequences. This Death Star will have to destroy Yavin, and he will have to be terrible. But you, as the audience, would therefore know that faith was the right answer. But you have a much more sophisticated way to lead up to that end, because you can't just take the same story and then swap that in the last 3%, like you were just talking about, and have a satisfying story.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it changes your entire Act 3. I was actually talking with you right before the stream about how I left this out of Stomping Kittens because there's already so much information in it that I want to confuse a beginning writer the least amount as possible. And I was also thinking about writing a separate book about this, because you can never find books on plot that specifically talk about the tragic protagonist. Go into detail about that. Most books on plot don't even mention the tragic protagonist. And your Act 3 is going to be completely different so you can't just replace the climax and that's it. Your entire Act 3 is going to be completely different. And I'm going to break it down for you right now. For anybody who wants to know about a tragic protagonist, here's the best way to put it in the most simplest terms. Right. During the Rubicon, the triumphant protagonist overcomes their dominant character flaw. The dominant character flaw is the internal antagonist. And then you have the external antagonist, which is supposed to be the physical manifestation in some way, the physical manifestation of the dominant character flaw. So then typically for the triumph protagonist, you kind of really only have one ending. When you break everything else away and you get the basic ending, is the triumph protagonist overcomes their dominant character flaw, and then during the climax, they fight the antagonist and then win. That's what makes them triumph protagonist. For the tragic protagonist, it's far different. The tragic protagonist surrenders to their dominant character flaw. The triumphant protagonist, when they overcome their dominant character flaw, they become the physical manifestation of the virtue. That's why the antagonist in their story is the physical manifestation of the flaw. So in essence, the climax is the flaw versus virtue. The representatives of the flaw versus virtue. They battle it out. The tragic protagonist surrenders to their dominant character flaw, so they themselves become the physical manifestation of the dominant character flaw. Here's the reason why this makes a difference. You already have an antagonist in your story, so now you've got two antagonists at that point. And this is called the antagonist replacement. Okay, and we'll use Revenge of the Sith as an example. General Grievous is the antagonist for Revenge of the Sith. That's he's the antagonist. Well, Anakin chooses fear over faith during his whole thing, and he then becomes the physical manifestation of it. There's multiple endings you can have with a tragic protagonist, because now that you have two antagonists, you have to eliminate one, which is going to be the old antagonist. Okay, you actually have three options, but one is so flat, the ending's so flat that I just consider you only have two options. I'll tell you the flat one real quick. The flat one is the tragic protagonist confronts the antagonist, and then they lose. And then Hollywood does that all the time. It's too flat. The two that you want, which is the antagonist replacement theory, is they surrender to their dominant character flaw, and then now you have basically two antagonists. You have to replace one. So take Act 3 and you divide it in half. The first half of Act 3 would be concentrated on replacing the antagonist, and then the second half of Act 3 would actually be the real climax, where you would have the new antagonist battling the virtue character, which in this case would be Obi-Wan. He's the physical manifestation of the virtue. He's what Anakin should have become if he would have chose the other part. So you have two alternatives. After the tragic protagonist surrenders to their dominant character flaw, they could then take out the old antagonist, replacing them, and then the second half of Act 3 would then be the new antagonist, which is the tragic protagonist, fighting the virtue manifestation of the virtue, and then Obi-Wan would beat Anakin, and then he loses. The second option, which is what Revenge of the Sith went for, is you can also have the virtue character take out the antagonist in the first half of Act 3, and then you have the new antagonist that's securing Anakin as the new antagonist. You then have Anakin and Obi-Wan fight, and then Anakin loses. That's what Revenge of the Sith did. Because in essence, your climax should be the flaw versus virtue representatives fighting. So that's really the big difference between it. Because again, the triumphant protagonist at the Rubicon, they're going to become the physical manifestation of the virtue, and their antagonist is already the physical manifestation of the flaw. Like in Jaws, what I mean by physical manifestation, like in Jaws, the shark is the physical manifestation of Sheriff Brody, the protagonist, his aquaphobia. That's his dominant character flaw. He has to, and he's a triumphant protagonist, he has to overcome his aquaphobia to deal with the shark. He's going to go out in the middle of the ocean and then battle the shark, and then he does, and he wins. Without overcoming his aquaphobia, he wouldn't be able to do that. He was scared to death of water. And the last line in the movie, he even vocalizes him overcoming his dominant character flaw, because after the shark's killed and the boat's blown up and they're in the middle of the ocean, they're swimming back to shore, him and his friend, he even remarks to his friend, he goes, I used to hate water. And because that's one of the recurring things throughout the whole movie is he hates water. He's aquaphobic, So that's going to come into play. And that's a big thing with the triumphant protagonists. They eventually become the physical manifestation of the virtue to counteract the physical manifestation of the flaw that is the antagonist. With a tragic protagonist, because you end up with two antagonists, you have to replace the old antagonist with the new antagonist that is the protagonist. See how confusing it sounds? That's why I didn't put it in Sonic Kittens. And then they battle the virtue character, in this case Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin, and then Anakin loses.
Okay,
so that changes the entire Act 3.
So how do you change? Well, first of all, make sure everybody understands what the Rubicon is, because we've said that a couple times, but I don't think we've said that specifically. Because you build everything around this point of the Rubicon, and if you're going to do a tragic hero, how does that, or a tragic main character, tragic protagonist, how does that change things that come before it before Act 3, before we crossed the Rubicon? Because we just said it wasn't enough just to change the last 5% of Star Wars.
Well, the Rubicon, you have, every protagonist has two antagonists. You have the external antagonist, which is, if you think of the protagonist and antagonist as hero and villain, you have the external antagonist, the big bad guy that they face during the climax of Act 3, and you have the internal antagonist, which they face most typically at the end of Act 2. It can be at the end of Act 2 or at the very beginning of Act 3, somewhere around there, depending on your particular story. But most often, it's at the end of Act 2. That's what ends Act 2, and then you transition to Act 3. Is I call it the Rubicon. For like Blake Snyder aficionados out there, it might be like, you could think of it as like the Dark Knight of the Soul transitioning into Break Into 3, something like that. Everything in your story before the Rubicon leads up to the Rubicon. Everything after your story stems from the Rubicon. And because it's so connected to the midpoint and the climax and the anchor point and all that stuff, if you figure out one of those, you can pretty much figure out the all the others because they're so interconnected. Because a triumphant protagonist. I'm sorry, do you hear that buzzing? Let me.
I do hear a little bit of buzzing.
Sorry, my computer, my fan for some reason started buzzing. I just jostled here. A triumphant protagonist has a false victory midpoint, thus a true victory climax, because the climax is just the midpoint on steroids. And then in between, you have a anchor point, which is going to be the opposite of the climax and the midpoint. So that's going to have a false defeat anchor point, typically what you'd call like an all is lost or something like that. And then that happens right before the Rubicon. The Rubicon is your first climax. It's at the end of Act 2. And that's where your protagonist confronts their dominant character flaw, that is their internal antagonist. What happens during the Rubicon is what determines your Act 3 climax. So that's, it has to. That's just what it does. If they overcome their dominant character flaw during the Rubicon, that's what makes them a triumphant protagonist, which means they're going to, they're rewarded for overcoming their dominant character flaw by victory against the antagonist, the external antagonist during Act 3 climax. Tragic protagonists, as I was saying with like Revenge of the Sith and stuff, that's something like that, they surrender to their dominant character flaw during the Rubicon. That's what makes them a tragic protagonist. And then that's going to cause them, to be punished. Because the triumphant protagonist is rewarded for overcoming the dominant character flaw. A tragic protagonist is punished for surrendering to it. And that's going to determine your climax. A lot of writers like to write backwards because even if you don't know anything else about your story, if you know your climax or the 5% of the punchline of your joke, because everything before is this 95% setup, you can work backwards. If you know your climax, you can then figure out your Rubicon and anchor point, midpoint, and all other stuff. Because that's one of the main differences between the triumphant protagonist and the tragic protagonist. And there's certain plot points that only a triumphant protagonist can have, and there's certain plot points that only a tragic protagonist can have. And the great thing about understanding what a triumphant protagonist is, most stories are about triumphant protagonists, is if you have a triumphant protagonist, you automatically have a tragic antagonist, which is just a tragic protagonist in disguise. And vice versa. So when you're writing your triumphant protagonist, you're automatically, at the same time, you're writing your tragic antagonist. Just like if you're writing a tragic protagonist, you're automatically writing your triumphant antagonist. Because that's just how story works. Everything's so interconnected. It's kind of like what we was talking about before with the and then thing and all that stuff. How when I ask somebody about doing novel consultations, one of the first things I'm going to ask is, what's your story about? Tell me your story, lay it on, just so I can get an idea. Well, typically a plotter will give you, within 1 to 3 minutes, they'll give you a linear series of events. And there's plot holes here and there, and that's typically what they need fixed, is help fix with the plot holes. But after like 1 to 3 minutes, you have a general overall idea of what their story's about. With a pantser, it's a lot different because a pantser doesn't think as linearly. They think in a collage of thoughts. They you ask them what their story's about, and after like 20 minutes of like backstory for characters, because pantsers tend to focus on characters and less on story. There are a lot of pantsers, they'll come up with like 5 or 6 characters, and then they think they have a story, but they don't, because you don't have anything. Who wants what? Who needs what? How are you putting them into conflict, and what's preventing them from getting it, and all this other stuff. Then after you get past that backstory, and they start telling you, well, I want this to happen at some point, I want this to happen at some point, and I want this to happen at some point, but I don't know when or where or why or how to connect them or all that other stuff. And that's typically when you're dealing with a pantser, you have to help them kind of bring that collage of thoughts together, in some kind of semblance of order. You have to kind of help them do that. That's really a big main difference. And when you ask a plotter what the story's about, they will usually say, well, this happens, but then this happens, and then therefore this happens, but then this happens, and therefore this happens. That's a great way to, that's how you should be writing your story. Because pantsers will tend to say, well, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. The problem with that is you can remove anything from that, and it doesn't really affect anything else. But if you have this happens, but then this happens, therefore this happens, if you remove one thing, it affects everything else. A lot of the stuff can't even happen. It's going to change your entire story. And, South Park, the writers of South Park kind of gave a resurgence to the attention of how to do this. But it's been around a long time. The whole replace and then with but then or therefore. That's how you want to tell your story. An easy way, if you have a feeling that your story isn't working, just tell yourself the story. And the second you get to your first and then, stop and then figure out how to replace it with but then or therefore. When I ask somebody what the story's about, what I'm really listening for is how many and thens they tell me, because the more and thens you tell me throughout you telling me your story, the more work I know that we have to do with your story. So that really comes into play right there.
So you're talking about making sure that every scene drives the next scene, is causal to the next scene, and something's happened here, so that way nothing is happenstance. And then something else just happens, and then something else happens to them. That everything that's happening, every scene, is to drive you into the next one.
Yeah, everything needs to be connected. You have to, man. My eye keeps itching. You have to think of your story is like a spider web, and everything is connected. All the nodes on your spider web is going to, if you remove one node, it's going to affect all the other stuff around it. So it's all interconnected. Everything in your story should affect something else in your story, and so that's how you've got a good story. If you just remove something and it just completely affects, you don't have a story, then your story breaks down. That's a great story. But if you can just take something out and it doesn't matter, then you've got a bad story that you need to work on, because it's just, you need to connect way more stuff. And one of the easiest ways to connect stuff is, this actually leads me into how to teach a plotter or a pantser how to plot. You do it. I have a sneaky way of doing it that I've taught over the years. I can't remember I can't remember the exact name of what it's called. I think it's called the 10-minute movie method. But I came across this years ago. This is a fantastic way to teach pantsers how to plot, because you're giving them an outline that's not an outline, but it's secretly a plot outline. And then afterwards they go, oh, that actually worked. Maybe I should actually start applying a little bit more plot. And what it is instead of telling them, well, here's the inciting incident, the key event, and the punch point, the pinch point, the midpoint. And instead of telling them all that stuff, all you got to do is tell them, make 8 big successes with 7 big failures in between. So it's success, failure, success, failure, success, failure. And then your last big success. This is obviously for trying for a protagonist. Then your last big success will be the climax of your story. And then you just leave them at that. And when you tell them that every success and failure should be bigger and whatnot, have more tension than the previous one. But 8 big successes, 7 big failures, 1 in between, and then just leave them alone. Because like if they were a painter, pantsers typically they like you to just give them a blank canvas and to paint some brush, and then you just say, hey, I don't know, paint me like a dragon or something, and then you leave them alone. Plotter, if you do that, you give them the same materials, and as soon as you tell them you want them to paint you a dragon, they're going to go, okay, well, how big? Is it flying? Is it sleeping in a cave? Or is there hills in the background? Is there a castle? What about a princess? They start asking all these details about it, stuff like that. That's kind of like how a big difference between how plotters and pantsers think.
We had studied Luke Skywalker on the original Star Wars on the channel quite a bit. And we broke down the different ways that actually the first part of Star Wars, the R2-D2 part, before Luke actually, R2-D2 gets to Luke, is kind of non-standard, I thought, kind of structure with the hero's journey and how it kind of differs. Actually, do you have anything thoughts on that? Have you thought much about the opening of Star Wars, the original Star Wars, and the relationship between R2-D2 and Luke Skywalker?
I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, I could get into like the whole inciting incident, the key event and stuff like that, if you want to talk about that with the whole A New Hope and stuff, because clearly the inciting incident is, after they procure the droids and stuff, Luke's messing around and he gets the whole holographic message from R2-D2 and all that stuff, the whole "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope" and all that stuff. That's the inciting incident. And sorry, I was reading the comment. And from Andrew.
Yeah, good evening.
And but yeah, like I might as well go into it since I started talking about it.
Okay.
The two most important events when you start a story, you should really start with these two most important events in your story. That's the Act 1 key event and the Act 3 climax. All right, and so you have your inciting incident of Act 1. If you take your Act 1 and divide it in half, the first half of Act 1 is going to culminate with the inciting incident. The second half of Act 1 is going to culminate with the key event. The difference between them is that the inciting incident is your protagonist's first awareness, not full awareness, the first awareness of the story's central conflict. The full awareness comes between the inciting incident and the key event, because that's Obi-Wan saving Luke from the Sand People, and then he tells he rescues them and then starts telling more about the Empire and Darth Vader and his father and all that other stuff. And then you get to the key event, which in Star Wars: A New Hope is the death of his aunt and uncle. And that prompts him into going with Obi-Wan, where before he was only here's the thing about revenge too, as I tell you about. And that before he was just going to drop Obi-Wan off at the spaceport, whatever the heck you call it, and then he was going to return to his farm boy life, depending on technology, to farm and all that other stuff. After he hits the key event and he discovers his aunt and uncle dead, murdered by the Empire, that prompts him. You go through this whole soliloquy and stuff, and then he's like, I've got nothing left. This and that. This is why he wants revenge, because he then agrees to go with Obi-Wan, and then the rest of the story happens. The key event is so important, and why you want to start with it, either that or the climax, is because the key event is what gives you your story's dramatic question. That is the most important thing you need to understand before writing your story, because if you don't know your dramatic question, you don't know your story. And the key event is what gets you that. And your dramatic question is going to be focused on one of three things. Your protagonist's main objective is going to be one of these three. They may have all three or any combination of, but one's going to be the main objective. Possession of something, relief from something, revenge for something. In this case, Luke wants revenge. And now, here's the reason why, like when you was covering this before, I think he was kind of hesitant of going, well, I don't know if Luke really wants revenge. Right. Revenge is just a catch-all term. It doesn't mean, revenge has been portrayed negatively, like especially with Hollywood, because it makes more movies interesting, like the whole John Wick and Punisher and all that sort of stuff. You see these people taking revenge, and it's all this bloody mayhem and all that stuff. Good people can want revenge too. What you have to think is that, in this case, revenge, you could replace it with personal justice. So it doesn't have to be portrayed in a negative light. Because a lot of people, they love Luke Skywalker. They like to think of him as this pure-hearted Jedi, this compassionate, pure-hearted Jedi. Well, you also have to understand that's how he ends up. Okay, if he doesn't start that way, or else there'd be no character arc throughout the trilogy. So he doesn't start off as this pure-hearted, compassionate Jedi. That's like what he ascends to and stuff. And so his dramatic question, once he finds his aunt and uncle dead, is, will Luke get revenge against the evil Empire for the murder of his aunt and uncle? That's everything else. Him rescuing the princess and becoming training as a Jedi and all that stuff. That all feeds into it. But his main objective is that, and you move to the climax, and he gets it. He trusts in the faith of the Force, and turns off his targeting system, blows up the Death Star. Him getting revenge against the Empire. He's thwarting their galactic dominating plans and stuff. So the two key events when you start a story, even if you really have no idea what your story is about, anything else, your Act 1 key event that's going to end Act 1, and then your Act 3 climax, and then once you have your climax, that you can then work backwards, and you have your Rubicon, your midpoint, your anchor point, all that other stuff. Your story immediately starts plotting itself out for you, because with your climax, if you have a triumphant climax, you'll automatically know you have a false victory midpoint, true victory climax, during false defeat anchor point, and during the Rubicon, your protagonist is going to overcome their dominant character flaw. Thus, why the climax? And the same thing with your tragic protagonist, just depending on what your climax is. And again, that's one of the reasons why a lot of authors tend to write backwards, because if you know your climax, you're going to know your story. You just need time to figure it out. It's the punchline to your joke. You want the punchline to match your setup in order for your joke to be funny.
What about what Andrew says right here when he says, I always thought Luke left because he wanted adventure. So he does want adventure in the very beginning. He wants to get off of the farm. And then he sees Princess Leia and needs to rescue the girl. Oh my God, she's pretty. I need to go rescue this girl in danger.
That doesn't prompt him into doing that, though, because before he finds his aunt and uncle dead. He only agreed to drop Obi-Wan off at the spaceport, and Obi-Wan was going to go hire Han Solo and do his whole thing without Luke. Luke was going to return back to his farm boy life. He was never going to go join the Rebel Alliance, all that stuff. He was just going to return home. The key event is what makes it personal. That's why I like calling it personal justice instead of revenge in this case, because the key event is supposed to. The difference between the inciting incident and the key event is the inciting incident is your first awareness, the protagonist's first awareness, the story central conflict. Then it's developed between the inciting incident and the key event. The key event is what locks in your protagonist to the rest of the story central conflict that is the rest of your entire story. They're locked in, either by choice or by force. They're locked in, and he becomes locked in because he chooses. He now chooses to go with Obi-Wan instead of just dropping him off. If his aunt and uncle was never murdered, he would have just returned home, and then the story would have been over. You could have had an entirely different story. So yeah, sure. This is one of the things that a lot of writers have a hard time with. I did too when I first started out. It's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff, or however you want to put it, and to get your story down to its basic core, because you have all these elements of, he wants to rescue the princess, he wants to join the Rebel Alliance, and he wants to train as a Jedi, and he wants to discover more stuff about his father and all this other stuff. But his main objective is when you have those one of three things that's going to keep your story on track when you're writing it, is he wants revenge against the evil empire for the murder of his aunt and uncle. That is what prompts him into going with Obi-Wan, and then the whole rest of the story takes place. Without that, if you remove that key event, the entire rest of the movie doesn't happen.
Right. Well, that's I often call it, I don't know if I got this from someplace or if it was something that I came up with. The danger comes home. When you don't accept the call to adventure, you get danger coming to you, and that danger that comes to you often propels you to, I can't just sit back. I can't just not accept the call. I can't just hang out, because if I do that, I'm going to die, or other people are going to get hurt, or whatever it is. So when the attack on the moisture farm happens, that's danger coming home. That's danger coming to Luke, saying, I can't sit back. I got to do something, because if I do, I'm going to die too. Andrew says,
that's the typical.
Once the family is dead, he's free, right? Because Owen is also like one of his threshold guardians. He was holding him back. So in this case, all of a sudden that's taken away. He's driven by guilt and duty to stay on the moisture farm. He knew darn well they didn't need him, but he felt that it was his duty. And then that is the Empire alleviated that obstacle. Yeah. Good.
Well, here's a you can kind of relate to. I'll give you an example as to why it's so hard to write a trilogy or a series compared to a single thing. This since we was talking about the key event, the key event, that's how you know it's a good key event, is if you can remove it and the rest of the story doesn't happen. And we'll use Lord of the Rings for example. First of all, we'll just focus on Fellowship of the Rings real quick. The inciting incident of Fellowship of the Rings is just Bilbo vanishing. He puts on the One Ring and vanishes during his birthday party. Frodo witnesses that, and that's his first awareness. Again, just the first awareness, not the full awareness. That's his first awareness of the story's central conflict to come. And he then gains more awareness because when Gandalf eventually, explains the ring and this kind of stuff, tells him he has to leave the Shire. That's then his key event. He has to leave the Shire to protect the Shire, and in consideration of just Fellowship of the Rings, he becomes the temporary ring bearer, and that's the key event in the inciting incident of Fellowship of the Rings. Well, the midpoint of Fellowship of the Rings is the Council of Elrond. I will take it. I will take the ring to Mordor, though I do not know the way. Now, the reason why it's so different, it's so much more complicated to write one story, like a book in a trilogy, compared to the entire trilogy. You also have to map out the entire trilogy. So the midpoint in just the Fellowship of the Rings is the Council of Elrond. But if you take into account the outline of the overall trilogy, the key event of the overall trilogy is the midpoint for Fellowship of the Rings. So your plot points aren't going to be the same for your overall trilogy as they are going to be the same for each individual book, and that can be very confusing unless you have a firm grasp on plot.
Okay, so say that again. So the Fellowship of the Ring midpoint at Council of Elrond, but what is that in the overall trilogy then?
Yeah, the midpoint for the Fellowship of the Rings is the Council of Elrond, but for the overall trilogy, that's the key event. The Council of Elrond is just the key event. Okay. And so when you're mapping out a trilogy compared to the individual books in the trilogy, that's why I tell people, if you're just starting out, don't try to write. I know you may leave the cart ahead of the horse. I applaud your enthusiasm, and I'm not trying to persuade you from not doing that. And that's great. But if you really want to write this great, fantastic trilogy or whatever, save it for a little bit later when you have 2 or 3 books written or something like that. Because all that's going to do is make your trilogy even better. You're going to be able to plot it out better, and it's going to make more sense. And it's going to resonate better. You're kind of doing yourself a disservice if you just start right off, just immediately trying to do a trilogy, and you don't really have a firm grasp on plot. Because it's like I said, the entire trilogy is going to be mapped out with different plot points than each individual book in the trilogy. So if you compare them, you're going to get confused because this key event isn't going to match this key event. This midpoint isn't going to match this point. And it's going to be you can get it all mixed up and convoluted, and then you're going to get frustrated. You lead to just pure frustration.
All right. Let me also point out that if you're working on a story and you'd like a free story consultation, please do come over here. I just put that link in there, and we got go over to that form, sign up there, and because Adron does do story consultations, and according to Sable Phoenix, they are fantastic. So if you're working on one and need some help, he will help you out, and you also have a chance to get a free one tonight. We'll draw at the end of the stream here. Okay. You use the Matrix as an example.
Quick bathroom break. I'll be back.
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Go for it.
Just 20 seconds. I'll be right back.
No, that's fine. That's fine. While he's doing that, I will point out that I posted Brianna De Silva's director's commentary. I was asked to please, if I could put some director's commentary or and producer's commentary on the Cultists channel as well. And you know what? We did have that. So as part of this major re-release of the Cultists, that is my Lovecraftian mockumentary about modern day Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who don't understand. And if you would like to hear commentary from both me and Brianna about what it was like to put together this web show, well, as part of the complete re-release on the Cultist channel, I put them in. We've got season 1, the first 3 episodes of season 1 right here. Producer's commentary in a playlist right here. So I've got my commentary for the first 2 season 1 episodes, and then today I also posted the second of Brianna's director's commentary that is on season 1, episode 2. So if you have been enjoying what she has to say on Table Talk, and you would like to see like what basically it's like the DVD behind the scenes commentary of what it was like directing the Cultists. So directors and producers commentary are up there on the Cultist channel right now. Andrew says, nice contrast of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Star Wars, the hero can't wait to leave. Lord of the Rings, the hero doesn't want to leave at all. Smart contrast. Sable says, talking with Adron helped me lay out my story in both a heroic and tragic outline. It's still bare bones, and I'm still working on all the surrounding mystery, but being able to see how, well, I bet more is coming here. Probably how those are interlocked probably is really helpful to them. So you use the Matrix as an example a lot in Stomping Kittens and other works. So we had gone over the Matrix too. Sable says, but being able to see how to swap out the order of events to get different outcomes is very interesting. Like I said before, Lego for authors is the way Sable calls the Stomping Kittens story kind of approach to storytelling. So we had taken a look at the first act of the Matrix, and I had come up with my analysis of it, but I hadn't thought about it hadn't gone back to reanalyze it after I had read your book, because you had applied different points or different plot elements to different scenes, and especially with regard to showing the hero at work and in play and at home. I didn't quite pick up on that point when I was going through my analysis the first time. Do you want to? And I think you also said you had some additional thoughts on the Matrix as well, since you've written it out. Do you want to start talking about the Matrix and see where we go from there?
Yeah, sure. One of the things I want to correct is I've been learning about plot. You make mistakes as you learn. I mean, that's one of the great things about mistakes. Mistakes exist as opportunities for learning. So I love making mistakes because then you just improve yourself, improve your knowledge. And years ago, like when I wrote Punching Babies, I had a hard time specifically discovering what an inciting incident was. I now know exactly what they are, but just like with lately, I was telling you before the stream, with like the key event, I finally got the key event worked out to the point to where I need to know everything about something before I want to advise people about it. And I had a hard time with the inciting incident. I thought I had a grasp on it, but it turns out I didn't. And I mistakenly said that the inciting incident in the Matrix is when he gets the call at work, at work, remember those terms, and from Morpheus, and he learns about the agents coming, and then he's told to go out on the scaffolding to escape, but then he his whole doubt versus belief thing, his flaw versus virtue argument take precedence in the movie. He does it and stuff. That's actually the development. That's actually the compared to Star Wars: A New Hope. That's actually Obi-Wan saving Luke from the Sand People, and then telling him they have that long discussion about his father and this and that stuff, because that's the development between the inciting incident and the key event. There's always the development of the story central conflict where the protagonist learns more. The true inciting incident of the Matrix, and this can be kind of arguable. I'll get that in a second. The true, just because of its 7-minute prologue, the true inciting incident of the Matrix is when Neo meets Trinity at the club, and she's confirming the Matrix and mentions Morpheus and all this other stuff. That's his first true awareness. Okay, you can kind of mistake it for before that when he gets the message on the computer, but it doesn't have all the requirements for it. When it says "Wake up, Neo, the Matrix has you," in his head, he could still be dreaming or whatever, or like somebody screwing with him or something like that. It's more solidified when he follows the white rabbit tattoo and then meets Trinity at the club. That's his first awareness of it, and then meets an inciting incident has 4 requirements. It must happen to the protagonist, whether directly or indirectly. Like Jaws, Sheriff Brody, if you wanted to make the opening of Jaws, the shark attack, the inciting incident, you could just put Sheriff Brody on the beach and he could witness the shark attack. It doesn't literally have to be attacked by the shark. So when I say that's what I mean by happens to the protagonist. But the inciting incident must happen to the protagonist. It must present their first awareness of the story central conflict. It must be tailored in some way to the dominant character flaw, and it must be linked in some way to the antagonist. Those are the 4 requirements for an inciting incident. And so that's what makes the inciting incident of the Matrix, him meeting Trinity at the club. And as to the homework play thing, he even doesn't save the cat. He's saving the cat by selling those people those programs that are going to help him, those illegal computer programs. That's just part of his save the cat. He was helping them out. And he's at home. He wakes up at home, and then he's doing his whole play thing where he goes to the club, and then it goes to the work where he gets reprimanded at work, and because there's nothing special about you. You think you can show up late, blah blah blah. So that's where the homework and play thing comes in. It's basically just your scenes and how you just choose to set the scenes and stuff like that. One of the things I'd like to point out about the Matrix, I love the Matrix. It's a near perfect movie. It's like, in my opinion, it's 97% perfect. It needs 3% more romantic development between Neo and Trinity because it just isn't there. But one of the things I love about the Matrix is the whole thematic development and how it pays off. Because during the midpoint, the whole Oracle thing, he's told that there is no spoon, by that bald-headed kid before he meets the Oracle, and then she tells him stuff, and then the whole twist that happens, and these are the bad guys close in, and blah blah blah. But he learns there is no spoon. Well, what that translates into during the climax is there are no bullets. That's the Neo's whole thing that he's after is he needs to learn the truth of the Matrix, and that's why when he's shot dead, he's not actually shot dead. The bullets don't really exist. The whole truth about the Matrix is that it's an illusion, and what's keeping Morpheus and Trinity and all of them from becoming the one themselves is that even though they understand that the Matrix is an illusion, they're still locked into the belief that if you die in the Matrix, you die for real. That's the one thing that sets Neo apart from it is he learns if you die in the Matrix, you don't die for real because that's the true measurement of the illusion, and so that's what allows him to become the one. Otherwise, he would have felt Trinity's kiss that revives him because if he was dead, he wouldn't have felt her kiss. She kisses him, he feels it and revives it. That's part and parcel of like how he realizes, oh my God, I'm not dead. I never was actually shot. And then when he revives, he sees the Matrix as the green waterfall, and he's then able to manipulate it, and he sees it for what it truly is. And there's a lot of things that go along with that movie, like how Cypher's failed the one before the Neo, and that's part of one of the reasons why he's so jealous of all of Neo's successes and stuff like that. That because he's got to thank for Trinity, and Trinity's into Neo and not him. They opened the prologue with that. Cypher and Trinity. Trinity goes to take over for Cypher because Cypher's watching Neo, and that's kind of hinting at how she doesn't need to be doing that, but she wants to do that. That insinuates she clearly has a thing for him. She kind of at least has some kind of fascination with him, if not feelings for him and stuff like that. And then later it's revealed that she's told that she's going to fall in love with the one. But that is the one flaw that I would complain about with that movie is you don't really get a sense that they're in love or that they're falling in love. if you would tweak the movie a little bit, add like maybe 1 to 3 minutes of separate scenes with just them in it and kind of developing the relationship a little bit more, I think that movie would be an absolutely perfect movie. So but yeah, I mean it also has a great example of the prologue. I say that often the prologue is without the hero, but about the hero. And the typical prologue for movies is like 3 to 7 minutes. The Matrix has about a 7-minute prologue. And it's about Neo, but without Neo. And because of the prologue, the agents learn Neo's name. And they're only after him to get the Morpheus. But without that prologue, without them getting his name, they can't get him to get the Morpheus. So then all the other stuff, it would happen completely differently. So, but I mean, I don't know if you want to keep talking about the Matrix or what. I mean, we can talk about the Matrix all night.
Well, so you said that I would say that when he gets the call at work, that's being called to adventure. I mean, that seems like a very clear call to adventure. Here's what you got to do. And he fails that call to adventure because he doesn't step out. So I like this Obi-Wan helping him out. That's Obi-Wan helping Luke away from the Sand People. I guess that scene, I guess I misinterpreted, because that is what I was talking about, danger coming home. Now looking at it, it's different. It's done differently in the Matrix because he's captured. The agents don't show up at his apartment like they do, like the stormtroopers do to Luke Skywalker's house. That's danger coming home. But because he failed, now he's confronting danger inside that room. So that's the same kind of thing. Danger coming home to you. It happens that Neo gets out of it. Which is nothing that Neo did.
Yeah. Well, you have to understand, like, the key event is. Yeah. Well, the key event for the Matrix is one of the most well-known parts of the movies is the taking the red pill, taking the blue pill. That's the key event that locks him into the rest of the story. Between the inciting incident and the key event is always the protagonist learning more about the story, sort of conflict and the development of it. Well, the agents don't really have to come after him after the interrogation thing, because they plant the bug inside of him, and then the tracking device or whatever to get to Morpheus. And so he wakes up and thinks it's all a dream until Morpheus calls him, and then during the car ride they suck the bug out. He goes, "Oh my God, that thing's real," And so they don't really need to go to his house because they implant that tracking device inside of his through his belly button.
Oh, right. It's done in a different way, but in another way, that is still danger coming to Neo because he's captured, and also it's danger coming to you because it's actually in your body at that point. I mean, he is experiencing danger because of his failure to act. It's worse than them being in your apartment; they're in your stomach. Well, where do you want to go from there?
We can talk about anything you want. I mean, I should have wrote down a whole bunch of stuff. I just wasn't thinking.
Okay. If there are favorite topics of yours, we can go into some favorite topics of yours. We were talking about, so we did the but then therefore. We talked about Luke Skywalker being motivated by revenge. There might be more to say about the tragic protagonist, the Matrix rethought. So if there's more essential stuff on the Matrix, we can definitely talk more about the essential stuff on the Matrix or any other well, I had another thought, but I left me for a second. Well, no, I still left me.
Let's talk about the midpoint.
Okay, let's do that.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are confused about the midpoint and the whole midpoint twist and stuff. Because when it comes to plot points, just because a plot point says this happens or this happens, doesn't mean everything in that plot point needs to happen. They all depend on your particular story. It's just like how you was just talking about how you get the call to adventure and this and that and stuff. It doesn't have to be in the Matrix, it's kind of a literal call to adventure. I mean, he gets a phone call, but it all depends on your particular story. There's certain things that should happen by the midpoint, if not at the midpoint. It's one of the reasons why I love Gladiator I say the Gladiator has like the most fantastic midpoint I've ever seen. But like the midpoint of the Matrix, we'll use that as an example. So we talk about the Matrix, where he meets the Oracle. He's a triumphant protagonist, and so that's a big success. It's his false victory. He's going to see the Oracle. She's gonna confirm that he's the one, and everything leading up to that. So far as like, okay, she's gonna confirm he's the one, and everything's on the right track, and all this other stuff. Then you get hit with the twist after the whole there is no spoon thing. That's necessary for the development of the thematic premise and eventually the climax payoff. You get hit with the twist that always happens, and a new key, a revelation of new key information. You're not the one, and then and on top of that, it's a double whammy. And then now either you or Morpheus is going to die, and it's going to be up to you. And then after that, a little bit after that, there's kind of his little conversation with Morpheus after that. After that, then you according to like the whole Blake Snyder beat sheet, if you want to use that, I'll probably typically keep it recited that because everyone's so familiar with it. Then you get hit with the bad guys close in. They're leaving, and then they get attacked, and and then you go more. The Matrix has a very short Act 2B because typically you have obviously for those who don't happen to know, you have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and you typically divide Act 2 in half. And this here, I might as well explain this for a second. My typical plot outline for a story that I start with is I take Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, Act 3, and I divide them all in half. So now you have 8. And so you have the first and second half of Act 1, first and second half of Act 2A, blah, blah for Act 2B, blah, blah for Act 3. And that's the old world stasis, new world flux. Things come together, false victory, things fall apart, false defeat, false solution, true resolution. And that's 1 through 8. And that's for a triumphant protagonist. For a triumphant protagonist, basically you can just take Act 2A and 2B and just switch them. Okay, and so that's really an easy way to come up with a plot outline. And I typically kind of, because I have all this plot in my head, I typically I'll answer one of those with each one of those 8 bullet points with like one kind of descriptive sentence, and I kind of just write my first draft from there. And incident. Second half of Act 1 culminates with a key event. The first half of Act 2A culminates with a pinch point. The second half of Act 2 with a punch point. The second half of Act 2B culminates with the anchor point / Rubicon. And then here's the tricky part, because you then have to for Act 3, that entirely depends on everything that came before it. So you can have your first half of Act 3 culminate with a climax or with a rescue or whatever, and then the second half of Act 3 culminate with something else. That all depends on your particular story. Act 3 is very malleable like that. That all depends. So when it comes to Act 3, you kind of just want to think the first half of Act 3 is the false solution. The second half of Act 3 is the true resolution. And then in the Matrix, the false solution, or the first half of Act 3, is Neo and Trinity rescuing after the Rubicon, where he realizes, I think I could save him. He's expressing his belief over doubt. The whole helicopter scene and them busting in there, they're these guns ablazing and fighting all these people, and they rescue Morpheus. That's the first half of Act 3 for the Matrix. That's the false solution, because it doesn't resolve the story's central conflict. Then there's an event where I call the separation, where almost always the protagonist is physically separated from the rest of their allies and all that other stuff, and that kind of divides the first and second half of Act 3. And then you get into the second half of Act 3, it's going to culminate with a climax or the true resolution, and that's where the subway fight, and then Neo runs away, and then he ends up getting shot by Agent Smith, and then revives, and then he confronts Agent Smith, and beats him and all that stuff. And then in the movie, roll credits. So that's where if you're beginning a story and you want to kind of just doing an easy plot outline, those 8 bullet points for your plot outline: Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, Act 3, divide them in half, and then you write one sentence each for that, and that's an easy outline that you have right there. And that's a really easy way to plot. And trying to think what else we can talk about with the Matrix. There's so much stuff you can talk about with the Matrix. It was such a cultural phenomenon.
Well, Andrew, on that subject, Andrew said the Matrix has a lot of visual groundbreaking work, like Star Wars did as well. How essential is that for these genre movies? Would be curious to look at the genre stuff that has bad to regular visuals. So it does seem to me like these movies often bring a lot of things together right. Their story structure right, but then they're also may do something like groundbreaking visuals, things people have never seen before. But Andrew also brings up, I guess the opposite is Avatar, great visuals, but I can't even remember the story. I have no idea what happened in that movie either. That's a weird one because everybody goes to see it and it has like no cultural impact. Great visuals, great tech.
Avatar is just a ripoff of Pocahontas. You know, like I'll give you a great example why Hollywood sucks, and they need to hire me to write their movies. You know, it's because yeah, look at the movie with Disney's Wish coming out. It's just a ripoff of Bruce Almighty. That's all it is. You got this entitled brat who's like, oh, the king is giving everybody their wishes, but it's like the selfish wishes, or they're not giving everybody their wishes. He's only doing it for personal reasons and selfish gains. So then she ends up going, oh, I'm going to give everybody their wishes and all this stuff, and then havoc ensues and blah blah blah. It's the exact same thing that happens to Bruce Almighty. You know, Hollywood now, that's because Disney writers suck and they have no talent, they're uncreative, and all they're doing is stealing stuff. That's why they'll steal something, and then they'll race or gender swap or both, and then they go, give me credit for the entire thing. It's like a 4-year-old could have done that. That takes no talent to do that stuff. And so and there's really only a handful of movies that exist. I mean, Blake Snyder really emphasized this whenever he broke it down to the monster in the house and out of the bottle, the buddy, you can go on and on. There's really only a handful of movies that exist. You're not going to tell a new story by now. They've already been told. It's just your personal tweak on it. You know, and it depends on the genre and stuff like that. And what's the name? You know, it talked about how, you know, does the effects and stuff have an effect on the movie? Clearly, it does. I mean, look at The Matrix when it came out. You couldn't look left or right going outside without seeing somebody wearing a black trench coat and black glasses. I mean, that's how much of a cultural phenomenon it was. You know what I mean? Because people were just so obsessed with The Matrix. Look at JP in one of the greatest movies ever, Grandma's Boy. You know, he's so the epitome of the Matrix obsessed geek. You know, the way he talks, the way he moves around and stuff like that. If you haven't seen Grandma's Boy, fantastic movie. You got to watch it. It's hilarious. One of my favorite movies of all time. I love that movie.
Grandma's Boy.
Yeah. And by the way, The Matrix, just going off of how like movies could be similar. If you've ever seen Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, it's The Matrix. That's all it is. They're the same movie. You know, they just have an emphasis on different plot points, but it's the same thing. It's a guy realizing he's in a simulation, and then he's able to manipulate the simulation. That's all it is. You know, they're the same movie. Hollywood just keeps ripping off the same movies and remaking them. Just like with Star Wars. Star Wars, perfect example, Force Awakens. I was never a big Star Wars fan, like as in a fanboy, but obviously I'm a Star Wars fan. How can you not be? Everyone's a Star Wars fan. But I was born in '79, and when did the first Star Wars movie come out? It was either '76 or '78. I can't remember. It was a little bit before my time when it blew up as a big cultural phenomenon. You know, and then kind of had a lull, and then blew up again. And I got interested in Star Wars during the lull period. And by that point, I'd already been exposed to all kinds of fantasy stuff. So when I first saw Star Wars, it didn't blow my mind as much. I loved it, but it didn't. If I would have been 10 years earlier, born 10 years earlier and seen it, it would have blown my mind. You know, and the whole thing about that is with The Force Awakens. Because I wasn't such a Star Wars, I didn't have these nostalgia glasses on when it came off. So I was able to discern it with a more critical eye. So when I first saw Force Awakens, within the first 5 minutes, I immediately recognized that all they did was it's A New Hope. They just replaced Luke with a Mary Sue. That's all they did. And I remember for the first like 2 weeks, I was saying that stuff in comments and stuff on YouTube or whatever, you know, and people were like, oh, you're just jealous or whatever. Like, you don't know what you're talking about or whatever, you know, whatever. Because people had all these Star Wars fans growing up Star Wars, and especially older people just loving Star Wars their whole lives and all that. They didn't want to, they had these nostalgia glasses on that didn't allow them to see the truth of A Force Awakens with Jar Jar Abrams and then eventually Roundhead Ryan. Friggin', you know, they just ripped off all that's all, you know, Jar Jar Abrams just ripped off a freaking New Hope. That's all he did. And like I said, he just essentially just ripped off A New Hope and just replaced Luke with this unlikable Mary Sue that's the bestest ever at everything. You know, so there's no character development for her character whatsoever. She never has to train in anything. I mean, my God, the first time she picks up a lightsaber to fight somebody, she fights Kylo Ren, who's been training his entire life with a lightsaber, and she equals him. You know, are you kidding me? What are you nuts? Like one of the most dangerous weapons in the entire solar system because it can cut through anything, and she's just an instant master at it. What are you talking about, woman?
My 6-year-old nephew caught up on that. My brother texted me the first time they were watching through that, and he was sitting on. My brother texted me. They were sitting on the sofa with the 6-year-old, his son, and that scene came up, and he said, Brecken just said, wait, has she ever used a lightsaber before? So even he got that. That was ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, if you notice, people, they were making all these videos, all these YouTubers were making all these videos about how great The Force Awakens was, and then it took about 2 weeks in multiple viewings, and then they started making these videos about, wait a minute, this is like, they might as well just call it a New Hope remake. That's all it is. And then now you see, like, with great YouTubers like Mahler. I love Mahler. He does awesome breakdowns. You know, with Chris Gord and Alan Ng with Film Threat, stuff like that. Gary from Neurotic, all the people. Jeremy from Geeks Gamers, Covercast 199. All the people, they've since done all these breakdowns of videos about that and saying, I was kind of blind by my nostalgia. Now I can recognize it from the bad movie it is. And that's one of the reasons why so many fans have been critical of the next two movies in the Disney Star Wars movies. Because now, after they watched The Force Awakens and they gave it a little bit of time and they removed their nostalgia glasses, they no longer have those nostalgia glasses on for the next two Star Wars movies. So now they're able to just criticize it and see all the bad stuff wrong with it. It's kind of like I was talking about with like a lot of pantsers. That's what Disney's been doing for years to the Star Wars the fans. They're telling you this joke, you're not laughing, and they're like, "Why aren't you laughing?" And you're like, "Well, the punchline doesn't match the setup. It's not a funny joke." And then they just kind of go, "Oh, well, you just don't understand our artistic vision because you're toxic." It's like, no, you're just. I'm not laughing because it's an unfunny joke. It doesn't work. I can tell you as a fan, I'm willing to invest my time and my money and support your stuff if you give me a good movie and quit destroying the characters and the lore. It has nothing to do with being toxic. You're just writing crappy movies.
Well, when you were talking about trying to plot out not only a single movie or story, but also an entire trilogy, Disney should have been able to do that. And it completely blows my mind that if you had Star Wars and you're like, all right, we're going to do it, it's going to be a trilogy of movies because there's been 2 trilogies before. So it's going to be a trilogy. The fact that the first thing you wouldn't do is sit down to really understand what all 3 of those movies were going to be and the direction you were going and what that was. The fact that they pantsed it like from director to director is so crazy to me. Robert says, I hated The Force Awakens because
it kind of reminds me of the writer Patrick Rothfuss.
I don't know him.
Well, he's a great writer, like very poetically. One of the biggest complaints about him is he uses ly adverbs out the wazoo. But I mean, he wrote the King Killer Chronicle. I can recognize within the first minute or so of reading someone's writing if they're mainly a plotter or a pantser. He's a total pantser, whether he says he plots or not. You can just tell from his writing. He's got the first 2 books out, and it's been like 15 years since his 3rd book. He originally promised that 1 book was going to come out per year. That was his mistake because he didn't. He had no idea about how things actually work and how you're gonna have to revise and rewrite according to a traditional publisher and all this other stuff. And so that's why it took more time. But if you read the first 2 books in his King Killer Chronicle, which has sold millions of copies and he's made millions of dollars and all this other stuff, his problem is he's pantsed himself into a corner he doesn't know how to plot himself out of. I can tell you that in 2 seconds. I can see that with his story because I read his first 2 books. And so that's why it's taking him 15 years or longer, who knows how long he's going to take before he comes out with his 3rd book in his trilogy. And because he didn't take the time to plot out his whole trilogy, even though he originally said, I already have the entire trilogy written, don't worry about it. I just have to revise and rewrite some stuff according to the publisher. Then I'm going to immediately release it and this and that stuff. And that was like 20 years ago. And his trilogy is still unfinished. And my God, if it's taking you 15 years to write a book, you clearly don't have a firm grasp on your story. And if you've read his first 2 books, he's a very poetic writer, so you can kind of give him passes on things because it's enjoyable to read his stuff because he's writing so poetic. But he's also a complete pantser in that his first 2 books are nothing but setup. Okay, and it's going to be impossible. I hate to break it to any Patrick Rothfuss fans. It's going to be impossible for him in just 1/3 book to pay off everything he has set up in his first 2 books. It's just not. It's not possible unless his 3rd book is like 5 million words long or something like that. He can't pay off all the things that he set up. And like I said, he's pantsed himself into a corner he doesn't know how to plot himself out of. Otherwise, his book would have came out 10 or so years ago. And again, I'm not trying to crap on him because he does a lot of other stuff too and all that. But there's no reason why it should take you 15 plus years to write especially the 3rd book in your series because it's supposed to be all payoff. You already have the first 2 books setting up the 3rd book. Most of the stuff's already done for you. You know what I mean? So that clearly shows that he didn't figure out the whole trilogy and then the end of those books plotting them out. Because if he would have no trouble with that.
It sounds like George R.R. Martin too. Like he writes himself, I think, into. I really enjoyed the way he started, and I still enjoy what I think he was trying to do. But it probably will never be finished because it's what you're talking about. He has no idea how to resolve what he's developed and created, I think.
Yeah. I think I'm lucky in that because I happen to be out of my stories. I happen to resolving the stories is where my skills kind of come in. So I'm kind of lucky in that. I kind of pride myself on having the best parts of my stories are the endings, and where everything is tied together, and you have all these surprises that are dramatic, though logical.
Okay, let me ask you this, and then I'll let you start, and I'm going to go grab another drink from the refrigerator. But when you said you were critical, and of course, in my opinion, rightly, of the Force Awakens as being, okay, we're going to rerun The New Hope. Okay, we're going to remake a new movie, and we're going to change a couple of things here or there or whatever. That's basically that. But we also said that there are only so many different movies that you can make, and so many different, like you're even talking about, there's only one essential plot story, and that you're not really going to tell a brand new story to anybody. So how do we deal with this fact that, first of all, you can't remake something because people are, rejecting that, or a lot of people will. But at the same time, everything is going to be like, if you're going to do the hero's journey, I mean, that's going to be a remake of the hero's journey. I mean, that's not something new. So how do you balance? I guess that's a good word. Realizing that you can't actually tell something completely brand new, but you don't want to remake something. How do you handle that? I'm going to grab a drink.
Okay. Well, it's easy. Live life. Chris Gore actually just it's so ironic. Chris Gore actually just talked about this. Yeah, writers tend to write what you know. And if you 30, 40, 50 years ago, you had all these interesting stories and all these interesting movies because writers were going to war and having kids and getting married, getting divorced, all this other stuff. They were experiencing life. They had tons of stuff to write about. Writers today, you have all these. They spend the first 30 years of their life doing nothing but sitting in their parents' basement, smoking weed, playing video games all day, and then they get a job at Disney, and the only thing they know how to do is just rip off other movies because they don't have any life experience other than their whole involvement with cancel culture. That's just a psychological thing right there. Is because you're so dissatisfied with yourself. The only reason why you would attack somebody else like that and try to cancel them is because you're just dissatisfied with your own life. Losers focus on winners. Winners focus on winning. Be a winner. Don't be a loser. Now, winners see other winners and we get inspired by them. Losers see other winners and they get jealous of them. Winners are inspired by their winners, and they can stand tall in their own accomplishments. A loser doesn't have anything to stand tall on. So instead, what they do is they knock everyone down around them to make it appear as if they're standing taller. And that's what all these. I mean, my God, we can talk for days about this. I mean, look at what's happened to the Marvel stuff with crap like She-Hulk. And one of the first things that comes to mind with that She-Hulk show that I'd love to cuss about this is that stupid scene where Daredevil's walking away after they spend the night together and he's carrying his boots. That doesn't even make any sense. I know the 40-year-old wine mom who wrote that scene thinks that it's funny, but it doesn't appeal to anybody else. And the reason why it doesn't make any sense is the reason why typically a woman does that with her high heels is because they're high heels. He was just carrying boots. He can just put his boots. There's nothing that affects your walk with wearing boots. So that scene doesn't make any sense. The entire point of that scene making sense is that she's carrying her high heels. Without the high heels, it makes no sense. But they thought, oh, we're going to really stick it to guys and we're going to reverse the rules and have the guy walking away doing the walk of shame. It doesn't even make any sense. And you would go, that's how that abomination of a friggin' TV show even came about. I don't even understand. But they're going to learn. They've been losing billions of dollars for years and years. And eventually there's going to come a point. They may be too big to fail right now, but eventually they're going to, they're getting hit in their pocket. There's going to come a point where they lose enough billions of dollars and they're going to go, you know what? This woke crap isn't working. If you're into that woke stuff, that's fine. But the majority of people aren't. Movies are supposed to be escapism, just like movies are art. They're supposed to make you feel something, anything, doesn't matter. The entire purpose of art is to evoke emotion, whatever that emotion is. And they just don't have that life experience to put stuff into their movies. So they'll just rip off our movies. These are just almost plagiarized. That's why Hollywood you see these movies. It kind of feeds off the fact that too, the older you get, the more movies you watch, the more you start recognizing that things are the same. Because you can only tell one story so many different times. But that depends on the writer, and that depends on their personal experiences. Like if I've had this certain, you compare the love life of somebody who's been happily married for 20 years compared to someone who's done nothing but had one night stands for 20 years. They're clearly going to be different, even though they're both about love and sex and romance and all that other stuff.
So, okay. So why don't we say this then? What if you were consulting on the sequel trilogy before it came out and an executive said, okay, we're going to do the hero's journey. We're starting over here. We want the hero's journey. We do want it to be a female lead this time. So we're going to be going to a female Jedi. We do want, And we do want to, well, obviously make sure that this connects with all of the everything thematically and visually with the Star Wars universe that everybody has loved, particularly from the original series, to lead us into this. What if those were the constraints? Because I think those are pretty reasonable constraints that somebody would have said. What if you had heard that? Yeah. Then what would you tell the writers' room from that? All right, now what do we do from those constraints?
Well, first of all, you need to appease the fans. Without your fans, you have to understand something. And this is what really gets on my nerves about writers, authors, YouTubers, anything you can insert in there. Without your fans, you're just, like, compared to authors, you're just somebody sitting in your house writing crap that doesn't get read. You owe everything to your fans. It's just like, I'm sure you understand as a YouTuber that, if without your fans, you're just somebody making a bunch of videos that don't get watched. You owe everything to that. So with an established franchise like that, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you're satisfying the fans. However that's going to satisfy, but you also want to surprise them, because you don't want to just satisfy them by, if you give something, it kind of feeds back to the movie The Wish. Now it's a ripoff of Bruce Almighty. If you give somebody everything that they want, you're kind of lowering those expectations, because, okay, they get it, but then it feeds into the whole Nirvana thing and life is pain with the Buddhist philosophy, the Buddhism philosophy. The reason why life is pain is, you can't be satisfied. Every time you get satisfied, you then want something else, or more of it, or this or that. And so you got to pay service to the fans. You just have to with Star Wars. My God, I mean that's like the most famous friggin' franchise in all of movie history. How can you not with Star Wars? And so one of the first things that immediately comes to mind is get Luke and Leia and Han and Chewie and R2-D2 and C-3PO. So you get them all together on screen. But now we can't. Now that's an impossibility. It's never going to happen. But that would be the first thing you figure out how to do. And because that should be the most important thing, at least for the first movie, your next trilogy, everything you write should be centered on protagonists. There's nothing wrong with having a female protagonist. That's there's plenty of movies I love with female protagonists. That has nothing to do with it. It's the fact that they had her as a Mary Sue. Nobody likes a Mary Sue. Nobody likes a Mary Sue because they don't struggle to overcome anything. Adversity builds character, and she has no adversity in her story. That's the number one key factor to remembering when you're writing your story is you need to inundate. You basically need to chase your protagonist up a tree, then throw rocks at them until they fall down, then kick them in the ribs for a little bit before they get up and then try to climb that tree again. They need to go through some kind of adversity because it's its own reward. If I just hand you $10 million right now, the chances are you're just going to go blow it on all kinds of stuff. You might go buy a friggin' 10 planes or something, even though you've never flown or never have any intention to, because why not? I got $10 million, whatever. But if I make you work for me for the next 20 years, 8-10 hours a day, 6-7 days a week or whatever, but obviously I'd be paying you handsomely for it, but then you earn that $10,000 or $10 million. You're not just going to go blow it on just a bunch of random crap. You know what I mean? Because you now value that money, and that's a huge thing that they didn't do with Rey in it. We would, everybody in the Star Wars fandom and stuff was just frothing at the mouth and just, all right, this is gonna be great. I can't wait. I'm giving you my time. I'm giving you my money. I'm giving you a chance. Just give me something better than just crap. And I'm probably gonna like it. At this point, because I just love Star Wars and I want something Star Wars. It's been so long and this and that, and new and all that. And then they give you this Mary Sue. And then she doesn't struggle for anything. She doesn't have to earn anything. She's the bestest ever at everything. And so there's no adversity involved. Think back at all the things like when she fixed that thing on Han, the Millennium Falcon, and she's like, oh, he's like, how'd you do that? And she's just like, oh, I just did this and that, and this, and he's like, huh? Like he's not going to know how to do that. It's his ship. Come on.
Right. She can fix the Millennium Falcon better than Han Solo can. Right.
Yeah, what are you talking about? And then there's also that scene where, like, whenever they return, she and Chewie return in Princess Leia, then General Leia at that point, or whatever. She runs up and hugs Rey. But Chewie's just standing there off to the side, picking turds out of his butt fur, or whatever on the side. What are you kidding me? Or that cringeworthy scene of C-3PO going, I'm just taking one last look at my friends. What friends? You barely even know these people. What are you talking about? I mean, it's just they were so trying so hard to force this fake nostalgia on the fans. That's just like in the Marvel movies with Thor, and he looks at Captain Marvel and he goes, I like this one. Oh, get the hell out of here. What are you talking about? Nobody likes her. Now I like her even less because you said that. It's so forced. They're doing this stuff. And like I said, with the trilogy, I would have based, we'll just start with, we can go with the first movie. I would have based that first movie, if not the entire trilogy, because Disney owns the properties. They got the next however long they want to keep making Star Wars movies, solely focused on around bringing Luke and Leia and Han and Chewie and all them back together. The heart of Star Wars, and then you involve some new characters and you would introduce the new characters. That's what the trilogy should have been, at least the first trilogy should have been based upon. And that I guarantee you fans would have loved that. And like I said, I'm not even a huge Star Wars fanboy. I can recognize that. I'm a Star Wars fan, but I'm not even a huge Star Wars fanboy. And I know that.
Well, I wondered with Rey, and I've spoken with Brianna about this on different streams, that, okay, she's going to be a warrior. So, the Jedi, so she's a warrior. This is an action-adventure story. So there's going to be violence and fighting. When it came to Luke, we don't have a problem with depicting the result of violence upon Luke's body. Like, we can really do some horrific things to Luke as a male, military age male. And I'm thinking predominantly here at the cutting his arm off. Right. I'm talking about that whole scene in Empire Strikes Back, where he is beat up, his face is swollen. He's just, got bruising and stuff. He looks horrible. He cuts his arm off. So he's been catastrophic amputation of his arm. Then you hit him with the psychological bludgeon of, no, I'm your father. So not only is he physically beat up, now he's emotionally beat up, and he's so down that he goes to commit suicide. Now he does get out of that, but that's a lot of physical violence that we're seeing and psychological violence. And I wonder if somebody said, all right, I'm going to have a scene like that, except for it's going to be Rey, if Disney would have ever allowed a scene like that to do violence on a woman's body.
No.
But we accepted that when it was Luke, and in order for Rey to have been as great, she needed a scene like that. Robert says that Rey should have at least lost one limb.
Yeah, maybe her head. Yeah, but that kind of plays into the whole. Whether I don't want to get into the whole political thing about it because I don't want to offend anybody. But I'll just say this: you have to understand there are differences between males and females. There are differences when it comes to our culture. War is a perfect example. One of the reasons why we tend to send all men to war and keep the women behind, it's not because we think they're going to be horrible in the field or this or that or whatever. It's because if you kill off almost all of the men of a country, the way to repopulate the country, to ensure the repopulation of a people, is that you have to have more women than men. If you take a society that's not, let's say there's only 100 people of it, and there's 99 men and 1 woman, compared to an opposite society where you've got 1 man and 99 women, the second society is going to thrive and repopulate. The first one's going to barely be able to do it and eventually probably die out. Though that 1 woman is only going to be able to have a certain number of kids, but that 1 man is going to be able to impregnate every single one of them other women. And that's one of the reasons. It goes back a long time ago, and that's one of the reasons why when countries, as people and stuff, they tend to protect the women when they go to war, because the women are the reasons that they're able to repopulate the people if they lose the war. And most of the men are killed off and all that other stuff. It's just like with writing, just creativity in general. There's a masculine and a feminine brain, and it doesn't mean that all men can only have masculine and all women can only have feminine, boys or girls or however you want to put it. It just means that in general, the majority of males have the masculine brain pattern. That's why they call it the masculine brain pattern, and then the majority of females have the feminine brain pattern. It's the masculine brain pattern. You tend to think linearly from point A to point B to point C and stuff. That's why men are tend to be very good at just, you focus on one task, you get everything about it done, and then you can move on to the next task and everything about it done. They're very linear applicants like that. This one of the reasons why women generally, or females, just tend to be great multitaskers. Ask any, just take a look at any woman's got a couple of kids, got to run a household and take care of their kids and all this other stuff. They're doing a million things at once all day long. Well, it's because they have a spider web brain patterns. That is the feminine brain pattern. So they're the central node, and they're keeping track of all these other nodes and all these other things. So that's why women tend to be better at multitasking compared to men because of the difference between the masculine and feminine brain patterns. And that comes into creativity too. And that also comes into, your ability to plot and stuff like that and come up with story and all that other kinds of stuff. It's going to affect the way that you do it. And it's one of the reasons why, a lot of, women will tend to focus more, like look at the romance genre. It's just populated by a lot of, female writers and stuff like that. And the action genre tends to be populated by male, writers and stuff like that. You can go into this for forever. I mean, that's more kind of psychological stuff, But I mean, yeah. First of all, Disney would never do that because they wouldn't even be able to tell you why, though. They would, because they wouldn't want to admit it. Just because in the times that we live in, they wouldn't want to be like, well, we don't want to depict a woman getting all those physical things. Yeah, of course she would need to do that, but just like an instinctual thing as a man, you just instinctually want to protect women. Men just have that inner thing in them. That you see a woman being harmed or something, most men are going to immediately drop what they're doing and go run over and try to help her, and protect her or whatever. That's just part of being a man and just living in society and whatnot. But today's Disney would admit that, like, oh, we can't have her losing a leg or a hand or hopefully her head, or whatever, and have her like getting cut with a lightsaber. They do that to Kylo Ren. He ends up cutting his face and all other stuff, and they put that whatever the heck that thing is on him, But they don't do that to Rey because she's a woman. Even though they want to. The problem is with these woke libtard writers and stuff, and these Disney writers in particular, they want to have their cake and eat it too. And they don't understand that you can either have your cake and not eat it, or you eat it and it's gone. So it's you can't have both. And they're trying to do both, and it's kind of like trying to please all the people all the time. That's what they're not really kind of doing that, but like I'll use that as a euphemism. You can't please all the people all the time. It's impossible. So when you try, you're just setting yourself up for guaranteed failure. So that's why you kind of pick a specific group of people to please, and then you focus on that. And if other people are pleased with it too, that's fine. It kind of goes into being used to criticism for your writing. You have to accept when you write something, you put it out there, and there's going to be people who don't like it. So you there's going to be people who hate it. You're going to come across people. It's like the author. You have to thank them for their time, thank them for their money, and tell them you're going to take what they have to say about it into consideration. Unless they're just one of the people who just like, oh, I hated it, and they spit in your face or whatever. Clearly, that's not constructive criticism. But they still spent the money on your book and the time reading it, even if they hated it. So you want to thank them for it, because that goes back to what I said. You owe your fans everything. If you don't, without your fans, you're just somebody writing crap in your house that nobody ever reads. You know what I mean? And so that's why you owe them everything. You should always revere them the highest of all people. You should be first. You write for yourself to please yourself and entertain yourself. Because if you're not entertaining yourself, you're not going to entertain anybody else. But you should always be focusing on your fans. And that goes back to the Star Wars thing of where that's, at least for the first trilogy, that should have been the main concern is reuniting the beloved crew while you work in the new protagonist and the new villain or whatever, this or that. And then once you have that for the first trilogy, you can go from there. One of the reasons why the first trilogy didn't work is they had Jar Jar Abrams writing the first one, and then Roundhead Ryan writing the second one, and they was just complete contradiction. I mean, look at Snoke, the whole contradiction to Snoke, and then I can't remember if Jar Jar Abrams did the third one or not. I don't remember that. But they had Snoke, and then they had all this setup. See, one of the most famous quotes from Steven Spielberg, one of the greatest directors ever, obviously clearly knows what he's doing, is anybody can write a great first act. Anybody can. It's because Act 1 is all set up. What your skills as a writer come in during the second act and the third act, because that's the development and the complications and the payoff. That's where your skills come in, because those are the hardest things to write. But anyone can just writing a setup. You just come up with random stuff that might happen. You're not paying anything off. You know what I mean? So and that's kind of what happened with the whole trilogy. They should have just gave it to just one of them and had just one of them do the trilogy, because you can see the conflicting ideas just in the first and second movie that they completely just weren't agreeing with. Yeah. So.
Well, okay. Actually, we have a little bit more time here. Let me say, I did put the link in here again that if you would like if you like what you're hearing from Adron here and you would like a free story consultation, sign up. He is doing story consultations, and if you sign up there, he'll also get your contact information so that you can set up a consultation for your story. But also at the end, we will draw free here. I remembered what I was going to say a few minutes ago, but I'm going to hold that. But we happen to also, let's go on to another larger subject here, because we happen to both have an interest in biblical storytelling. That's actually come up here on Table Talk quite a bit. It seems like a lot of people also have that interest, because you told what is it? Which book was it? That's Adam and Cain and Abel. So what is it that draws you toward biblical storytelling, and why is it important?
I've always been fascinated with the Bible. I've always been fascinated with religions. I've always been into that since I was a little kid. I've always been into like quantum mechanics and stuff like that since I was a kid, and science and religions. Those were like my three things when I was a kid. I just been fascinated by those things. And it's because, and again, I'm not trying to, if you're religious or if you're not religious, I'm not going to try to make a stance on it. I'm not trying to offend anybody. Whatever your view is, that's great. Whatever makes you happy. Two things I try to not talk about, just because they tend to offend people, is the Keanu Reeves rule, is the politics of religion, because somebody's always going to get upset. But since we're on this topic, clearly I'm going to talk about it.
Well, this Bible is not necessarily about belief in any religion. This you could approach this completely from a cultural aspect too, about the stories that are part of Western society and all of that. So yeah, this isn't necessarily a discussion on what you should believe. It's just religious stories in their place.
I found the Bible so fascinating because it has tons of just fascinating stories in it. Just like where the Grigori came from, the giants that was kind of ruling the earth and stuff like that, wreaking all kinds of havoc and all that. Well, they came about because they were abominations that were given birth to from the unions of angels and humans. Well, if you go into that more, you understand that the reason why they, some people will read that and just go, oh, okay, I just kind of take it that that's what happened. But you don't really know why. Well, the reason why is because angels are made of fire and air, and humans are made of earth and water. And when you combine, you're not supposed to combine those four. And so when they combined them, and angels had offspring with humans, it created these monstrosities and these giant monstrosities called the Grigori that then went around eating people and all, destroying stuff and all kinds of stuff. That's one thing I've always found fascinated by the Bible. Is just it has tons of stories in it like that. And I was talking about this before about how I can't remember the specific passage, but one day to God is 1,000 years to mankind. So that's where a lot of the Christians that have like the belief that it's like a 10,500, 11,000 years old. You account for it, you add up the 7 days of Genesis and stuff, and time before, during, and after Jesus and stuff like that. Then they kind of get a timeline. That's where that kind of comes from. That's very interesting. I mean, and you could go on and on and on because the Bible's filled with so much stuff. And there's also stuff where they don't extrapolate on stories that they probably should. I don't know if you really want to get into that, but there's some bad stories, and it's not me trying to bash the Bible in any way, in case you're like really Christian or something like that. But like the story of Lot, I could get into that, and there's some very negative connotations of things that happen with that particular story that most Christians aren't even aware of about the story. Other than him just escaping the city and his wife being turned into a pillar of salt. There's something after that.
So it's bad. It's bad from your perspective. I thought you were going story structure, but you're talking about also about what it's necessarily promoting, or its messaging, or its theme.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just briefly say it real quick.
Sure. Sounds interesting.
Lot and his two daughters and his wife are escaping. Yeah, they're escaping, and they're told not to look back. As the city, everything they know in their entire lives are being destroyed. Well, of course, his wife looks back because, like I said, everything in their entire lives are being destroyed. So then she's punished by being turned into a pillar of salt. Well, for the next 2 weeks, Lot and his two daughters are hiding. They're basically living in a cave. And well, his daughters are worried about him being able to carry on his seed and have offspring and stuff like that. So what they do is they get him drunk every night for 2 weeks, and they both take turns raping him until both of them are pregnant. A lot of Christians don't know that. That's the story. And, you can check this. You can verify this out easily. That's the rest of the story of Lot that when you go to church, they don't tell you. You know what I mean? And that's got negative connotations to it. You know what I mean?
Why do you think it is that we tend to not know these things? I mean, if you want to study the stories in the Bible, where do you go to do that? Basically, you have to do it on your own, because we've talked about going to church or Sunday school, and that just never really coming up. I said that one of my favorite times ever in Sunday school, which was an exception to the rule. Ordinarily, I didn't like going to Sunday school. But in 4th grade for Sunday school, there was a husband and wife teacher team who taught. We just talked about the story. We were doing Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors. And I loved going to Sunday school that year because they actually were like, all right, let's talk about what this story is. It's in the Bible. And we went through a lot about Joseph, and we're just telling the story. that otherwise people don't even know what's there. I mean, when people think of the Bible, they will think of, a short little 1 sentence or 2 sentence thing that's supposed to give you something about some instant morality thing, and not about what all the stories in it. Sable says the Bible is full of stories that aren't family friendly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the reasons why they do that, to me personally, I want to know the bad, because the bad only emphasizes the good of the good. It emphasizes it in an even better light. So first of all, I want the whole entire story, but you don't want to have just all the good. That's one of the reasons why a lot of Christians fail in making movies and writing books and stuff like that. Not all of them, but because they tend to go, well, I need to only show the good and this and that and all this other stuff. Well, people don't want that. That's that's not human nature. People are good and bad. It's, shades of gray. We're not just black or white. We're shades of gray. But when you have bad in a story, all it does is only help emphasize the good even more, and vice versa. So, but they, like I said, I mean, they consider people to be a little bit more reluctant to converting to the faith and this and that. So it kind of goes along with, I'm just how many books are canonized to be put in the Bible, in the Book of Enoch, the Book of Barnabas. I could go on and on and on. And some of those are fascinating, and how it gives an explicit detailing of heaven and hell and all that other stuff, and details of what happens to people to their particular sins, how they're punished, all kinds of stuff. The two most read parts of the Bible are Genesis and Revelations. That's because those are interesting, and they go into details about, especially Revelations, of the horns. This was going to break, and this horn's going to blow, and then the plague of frogs, this flood of blood's going to come down. All this other stuff. That's interesting. There's stuff going on, and people, you could turn that into a million different movies, and people are going to watch it. But there's tons of boring stuff in the Bible too, but nobody's going to watch that stuff. So they didn't specifically, the Vatican didn't specifically, canonize certain books because they didn't want. They was trying to not have it come off as some wild and crazy thing, which I obviously clearly it helped. There's over 2 billion Christians on the planet now, so clearly it helped. But if you would have included some of those books, like how Solomon built all of his temples because he had a magic ring that allowed him to control demons, and so he had these which that would make a fantastic story, and he used those demons to do all kinds of stuff, and build his temples and all kinds of other stuff. That's interesting. I would love to see a movie about that. It kind of feeds into Lord of the Rings a little bit. It's because you get this magic ring that does stuff. But it's a little bit different. With the whole Solomon thing where he can now control demons because of his magic ring and stuff. A lot of people don't even know about that, and that's not even that well hidden or anything. That's very interesting. I mean, if you would kind of take someone who's not Christian, and so they're so worried about putting all this stuff in just a good light, and they would go through the Bible and pick out stories, they would have a ton of references and sources to make just a ton of awesome stories and movies and stuff like that. But so many Christians, when they do that, they're too worried about showing the negative, and they don't understand you need that contrast, because that's going to make the positive appear even more positive. It's going to emphasize the positive even more. You need that negative, and they tend to leave it out.
I think that's an excellent point, because when I use, the Trial of St. Gabriel as the story that I'm bringing to Kickstarter very soon, I want to use Christian and Judaic themes of mythology in another book that I do, another series that I do. Brianna is also very interested in it, but I think that you talk about, and this has been in some other books as well, but in your books on story, you're talking about going back and forth on the theme. That, okay, we're going to ask ourselves this question, and then we've got this argument between these two sides, and then for the purposes of the story, one of them will win out. But if you're not capable of providing the argument, it's not going to be a good story, whether that is a Christian. If otherwise you're just a mouthpiece for one particular side, and it's just a speech about one particular side, whether that's a particular political viewpoint or a particular religious viewpoint. Those stories fail for that reason, because they can't provide the argument, or they don't provide the argument.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of something here. I can give you a quick way to just an easy way if you don't want to get too into plot, if you want to detail your thing. Like I said, the two most important events of your story, if you're starting out, is the Act 1 key event that we've already covered. We can go into that a million times. But the Act 1 key event, and then the Act 3 climax, because from that you can get all the other stuff from your story. Well, you're going to get your dramatic question from your key event, and then your climax is going to answer it with either a resounding yes or a resounding no. After the key event, but before the climax, it feeds into how going back and forth. Every event in your story needs to have something to do with answering the dramatic story question, however vague or whatever. And so you go through all of these series of events, and the events are going to either be yes or no, yes or no. Is this getting them closer to answering this dramatic story question with a yes? Then you have yes. This gets them closer. This gets them farther apart. This gets them closer. This gets them farther apart. Yes, no, yes, no. That's an easy way to determine your events. And in all these mini yes and no's, they should be getting more and more pronounced and more climactic and stuff, and with more conflict and tension and building and all that other stuff. That's kind of obvious. But they eventually lead up to the climax. They funnel effect into the climax, where the climax finally answers it with a resounding yes or no. And then that's that you're going to get your entire story from that. And like I said before about that, that's why a lot of authors like working backwards. If you know the climax, you're going to know immediately. You already know the midpoint, the anchor point, the Rubicon, all that other stuff, and that's going to feed into your key event and your inciting incident and all that other stuff. And because all of those things are so interconnected, if you know one of those, you can determine all the other ones. Just like in Stomping Kittens, I focus on the Rubicon because the Rubicon can determine. It's an easy way to determine all those. Because you got your wound, shield, and sword, and your flaw versus virtue argument from that. And then you can immediately jump to the Rubicon. I give an example in Stomping Kittens, where let's say you don't know what you want to write, but you want to write something, and so you want to start with that. The whole basic concept of the whole wound, shield, and sword, and the Rubicon thing. And you go, well, I'll take I say to take your 10 favorite books, 10 favorite movies, figure out a common theme, because you should try to at least try to write what you love. And you go, oh, these are all romances, and there's always a love conquers all theme. You determine that. You spend 5 minutes figuring that out. These are my favorite books and movies, and that's what's in common with them. So you go, oh, I'm going to write a love conquers all. You just plot with those 3 words. You just plot out your entire story. Not the banal or all the intricate details of it, but you just plot out your story. Love conquers all. You've got your virtue. Love conquers all, and you've got your Rubicon and your climax, because during the Rubicon, clearly your triumphant protagonist is going to overcome their dominant character flaw and then win the day during the climax. And then that's going to give you your midpoint and your anchor point and all that other stuff. It's going to tell you exactly what they are. And then you can figure out your key event and your inciting incident and all that other stuff. Oh, going back to the whole erotica thing, just by the way, erotica is way easier to plot too, because the overall dramatic story question is basically getting laid. You know what I mean? And the answer is yes, because that's going to be the climax is the whole getting laid part. You know what I mean? So that's just those are already determined for you. You know what I mean? That's just one of the million examples I could give as to why writing erotica is so easy. But with erotica, you have to understand you're not writing letters to Penthouse. What you're really selling with erotica is you want your story to be about 90% anticipation. Consider that foreplay before the sex or whatever. Because you're really selling the anticipation along with the fetish and stuff like that. But I'm getting kind of off track on that. So.
Well, okay. I've got one other question here that is the one that I had kept slipping my mind, and this one does kind of go back to the very beginning when we were talking about you were talking about a sequence of events and making sure they're all leading to one another. Let's say that you're starting out and you have been plotting out some kind of world and history, and you've got all these different events about the different wars and things like that. Early on, and we've talked about it here, that a sequence of events is not a story. Okay, we've got this sequence of events, and this is a really cool sequence of events, and this cool battle between these two groups and this war and all of that, or whatever it is that's happening in your story world. How do you then, I think it was like X-raying the story. I've got to find the story in here, and then I can use all of this as the background setting and the backdrop for what's going on and writing in here. But if you've got an author who's got this great sequence of events like this history, how do you X-ray it and focus it? Like, no, this right here, these events right here, this actually needs to be your story. How do you get them to find that story?
You got to find your Batman. I know this sounds, but you got to find your Batman. Batman is always going to be the focal character of like the Justice League, because he's the one you can most relate to. He's the human among the gods, and that's why Batman is so successful, and Batman movies are, and why everyone loves Batman. And you got to find first you need to find a relatable or admirable or whatever, both hopefully, focal character to tell those events through and show those. And it depends too if you're writing backstory. I don't do backstory and I don't do world building before I do anything else or anything like that. All of my backstory I do zero backstory, zero world building before I start writing a story, before I start writing my first draft. If I think of something that comes into play for backstory or world building while I'm writing my first draft, I'll stick it in there because I stick everything that I can think of while I'm writing my first draft, which is kind of ironic because if you look at some of the reviews, a lot of my reviews they're praising for like all the world building is so in depth and intricate. This and that. I don't do any world building. I don't spend any time. I do no time. That bores the crap out of me. If I have to sit there and like try to take a notebook and go, oh, I need to come up with this backstory and this and that. I want to blow my brains out after 15 seconds. I want to get to the story. And I want to write the story and the action, what's going on. So I don't really do any of that. But I do advise if you're into that, and I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do it. Clearly, you got Tolkien is the perfect example. Somebody who clearly did tons of world building and backstory. But if you're into that, look up Brandon Sanderson on YouTube. Fantastic writer. I don't know him personally. He seems like a really cool dude. Great writer. He's known for his world building and backstories and stuff like that. He has hours of stuff on YouTube that gets into the real detail of it, of how to do your backstory and world building and in particular and all that other stuff. But yeah, you really just need to find a focal character, because like readers when they're reading your stuff, they want to put themselves in the shoes of one of your characters. Typically, it's the protagonist, hopefully. But it could be other characters too, because that's escapism. You're wanting to. It's one of the reasons why you don't really want to get all political and all that crap, unless that's the main thing with your book, is because you're already inundated with that stuff 24 hours a day. That's one of these like what Disney doesn't seem to understand. We're already inundated with all this stuff, this political stuff, and all this other stuff 24 hours a day. I want to escape it by watching your movie and relaxing, having a fun, good time, and enjoying myself and this and that. And then you're still inundating me with all that stuff. Get that out of your movie because I don't want that in there, and that's why I'm not liking your movie. But yeah, going back, it's all about finding a focal character, and that depends on you as the writer. That depends how you want to tell your story. You're having a massive war. You might want to tell it from the general's perspective, or with the general standing over the hill, overlooking everything and observing it. But that's more of an outside observer perspective. You really want to tell it from a soldier's perspective. That's one of the reasons why so many war movies, especially successful war movies, tell it from your basic soldier's movie, and they tend to be more of a basic soldier because that's more relatable. The more defined you get as your protagonist, the less relatable they can be. Like me, I have no problem with there's plenty of stories I love reading and watching stuff where they have a female protagonist or like a black protagonist or whatever. I have no problem relating that whatsoever because I maybe that's why I'm a writer. I have a very big suspension of disbelief, and so I have no problem placing myself into you could a centaur character or whatever. It wouldn't matter to me, whatever. I can just place myself into that character just fine with my imagination. But there's a lot of people that maybe they're not. A lot of authors will kind of describe their character like the protagonist. They'll just kind of say they have dark hair, and leave it at short dark hair or whatever, and leave it at that instead of going into like 5 paragraphs describing like the exact detail of their their hair or something, because they may think that the reader is going to be able to relate less. I mean, and look how many in video games. Look how many people love character creators. I'm.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how people do it. I spend a little bit of time in character creators, but just people that they'll spend hours creating their character, even though you never see them because you just leave your controller sit, and then after like 2 minutes, then the camera will start panning around it. That's like the only time you see your character, but they'll spend 9 hours creating their character and perfecting the face. And it's like, you don't even see the face. What do you but they love doing that. And some people are like that. So, it all has to do with the relatability and stuff like that. Also, I want to mention something because it's popped in my head. Never use like similes. This is okay. Never use like similes. All right. If in your writing, like similes, he slept like a log. Her eyes were like a midsummer hurricane. Don't tell me that crap about how that's poor description, and you're telling me stuff. Tell me that there's menacing flecks of ebony, a flutter in her captivating cerulean irises. That's way better than saying her eyes are. And I just came with off top of my head. You know what I mean? Like if I actually had to take time to write it, it'd be a lot better than that. But that's a lot better than telling me, her eyes were like a winter storm or something or whatever. What you're doing is you're taking the winter storm part and you're making that do the work of describing her eyes for you. That's poor lazy writing. Sorry, I didn't mean to cuss. And so you never maybe use one like, allow the rule of one like simile throughout your writing for like one book, but try to not use it, because you can use it in your first draft, knowing that you're going to have to go back and replace it and add actual description. But a big red flag of bad writing is just like simile after like simile. Oh, her anger was like a lit fuse, and he slept like a log, and this and that. They fought like cats and dogs. Well, you're just what does that even mean? They fought like cats and dogs. I can kind of get an idea, but there's no detail to it. I want the detail. You're telling me something and not showing me the actual details of what's happening. And so I wanted to get that out there too, because that's something that really annoys the crap out of me. Is when I purposely read at least one bad book a month, because you learn a lot more from reading a bad book than you do a good book. Because a good book, you're engaged in the characters, you're engaged in the story. Yeah. Oh, I could tell you some writers I got. I got one in particular who he's my immediate go-to to read his books. I'm not trying to crap on him or nothing like that. He's bad. I wouldn't feel bad about it, because he's just, if you've read any of his interviews or something like that, he's a total douchebag. but I read at least one bad book a month, because because you learn so much, because this stuff recurs throughout the writing. And never use the word was. I want to touch on that real quick, because that's my golden nugget before if we have to end the stream or whatever. Because I know you might be pressed for time or something. I want to get that out there. I want to describe that. But with a good book, you're so engaged in the characters and the story that you just kind of give everything else a pass if there's anything bad in it, plot holes or whatever. So you kind of skim over them and forget it, because everything else in the book's fantastic. With a bad book, those things are just irritating the crap out of you, to the point that when you finish it, if you can even finish it, which you should, you then remember to not do those things in your own writing. And you're now a better writer for reading that bad book. That's why I recommend every writer you should be reading for hours every day. So clearly you should be reading at least one book a week. I mean, it shouldn't take that long just for one book. I mean, I read tons of stuff, and I'm a lazy writer, a lazy reader. But you should set yourself a goal of reading at least one bad book a month. I do that on purpose, because that's how I came across the rule of never use the word was. And the reason why I said that if I could only come on here for 2 minutes, if I can only come on here for 2 minutes, explain one thing to any writer watching this right now, this is the most important thing I would tell you. Forget everything else. This is the most important thing I've learned that will improve your writing immediately and immeasurably. And it's those 5 powerful words that sum up a whole planet's worth of gravity. And that's never use the word was. Now, there's a caveat to me explaining that, because of course you're going to use the word was. The point being is that what you should do for the next 3 months, every day you write, anytime you use the word was, finish your sentence, and then now go back, delete the word was, and don't be a moronic Micah and replace the word was with had been or something like that. The entire point is you don't want to replace one passive with another passive. You remove the word was, and then you restructure your sentence into a stronger, more active sentence. It may take you 5 or 10 minutes for that the first time you do it. You'll get used to it. You'll start, once you get used to it, you start speeding up really quick. Like now, my brain already just automatically does it before I even write the sentence out. Like I literally never type the word was unless I mean to. And dialogue is exempt, because you want people say was all the time, so forget about dialogue. But do that every day for the next 3 months until it becomes a habitual practice. That way, when you do use the word was, it's very sparingly, and when you're using it on purpose. Okay, and because was is passive poison to 99% of every sentence it infects. Okay, and I could go on and on about of course passive verbs and this and that. You should try not to use them most of the time. But I found that was is the #1 killer of great fiction. When you read a bad book, it tends to every 2 or 3 sentences has the word was or some variation of it in it. If you don't believe me, here's what you want to do. Because I was actually reading a book from one of my specifically bad writer that I use every once a month. And I noticed that every other sentence had the word was. Plus, it was rife with like similes too. And I'm like, my brain started removing the word was and restructuring his sentences for him. And I'm like, every time I do that, the sentences are 100 times better. And this dude sold millions of books, making millions of dollars. How does he not know how to do that? And this was years ago. And so what I want you to do, if you don't believe me, is take something that you've written that's at least a couple thousand words long, because you want was in it at least 20, 30, 40, 50 times, whatever, so you can see the effect of it. The next time you write, like tonight, tomorrow, whatever, okay? Take that passage, and the only thing I want you to do is do what I just told you. Dialogue is exempt, but start from beginning to end. Anytime you see the word was, delete it and restructure that sentence to a stronger, more active sentence. Don't replace was with had been like an idiot, because clearly you're replacing one passive with another. You restructure the sentence to a stronger, more active sentence. You may even have to restructure the paragraph. And like I said, if you're not used to it, it's going to take you a little bit. But each time you do it, you get faster and faster and faster to the point that it becomes automatic. And once you do that to your let's say you did it for 10,000 words or whatever. Once you finish with that, go back and reread it. And I guarantee you it's going to read 1,000 times better than what it did before. And that's the only thing you did is you replaced the word was with, didn't replace the word was, you didn't use the word was, you restructured your sentence containing it. And that's the only thing I want you to do for your editing. I guarantee you it'll read 1,000 times better. And if you want to test that, give it to somebody and have them read it before it, and then give it to the what you did after editing it and have them read it. And I guarantee you they're going to tell you that, oh, this is way better. It's way better. I tested it myself and all that stuff, and it blew my mind how instantaneous and immeasurably that just immediately improved my writing. That is the number one thing that I've noticed in bad writing is the word was is rampant throughout the writing. And when you learn how to take that out and restructure the sentence, it's insane how the improvement that you get is insane. So I wanted to, that's my golden nugget of knowledge that I could pass. Stephen King's got the whole omit needless words. That's the number one rule for editing and stuff. Mine is for number one rule for writing productivity is write first, edit last. But that's my golden rule for if I can only come on here again for like 2 minutes and explain something and then just be out here or whatever, that would be it. That is the most important thing I can impart to any writer. It's if they're going to do that. Never use the word was.
All right. Well, we have been going for a couple of hours, so I think we should come to a close here. But so let me ask: is there any? We've got a winner over here for the drawing here. But then this can be any topic you want. But so if there was a second topic, that was the one thing that you come on and talk about was. But what is it that we've not talked about? That's one of your favorite things, whether it's a movie or a part about writing or editing. What is it that we didn't cover that you love to talk about that we should have? Is there anything that you held back on?
I could talk for days on plot. Let's talk. One of the things, like we'll go from one of my favorite movies, or my favorite genre. They love tragic romances, and
okay.
There's a lot of people who want to write that stuff. And basic plot skeleton for like romance writers and stuff like that. You got Act 1, Act 2. Well, Act 1, Act 2A. Midpoint must be stressed in a romance story. Okay, Act 1, Act 2A. Midpoint, Act 2B, Act 3. Boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy and girl have sex, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. That is the typical romance plot skeleton. Okay, if that's your main plot, that's typically the subplot. Almost always that's some kind of variation of is typically the subplot. The whole love story, love subplot. That's where the name comes from. So just knowing that right there, you automatically got your subplot. You can just write 5 sentences for it, and then you basically have your subplot mapped out for your love story subplot. The one of the key differences though is if that's your main plot, that's going to be your meet cute. The Act 1 boy meets girl is going to be meet cute. That's going to be your inciting incident. Okay, that's going to have to take precedence if the love story is going to be your thing. Because and then you have to have an emphasis on the romance or the sex at 60, if you want to call it that, the midpoint. It needs to have precedence in a love story because that's where that is the most defining moment in the entire relationship. And if you're writing young adult stories, you can replace they have sex with like they kiss for the first time or whatever, or it's just the deepening of the relationship that you can't take back. That they cross over a boundary. Irrevocable boundary. Like when you have sex with someone, you can't unhave sex with them. That's why. That's why they typically have that sex at 60 thing. And that comes from screenplays. 1 page of screenplay is 1 minute of screen time. That's where they work it out generally. I wish Call Me Chato was in the chat. He can confirm this stuff. He's got experience with that. One page of screenplay is 1 minute of screen time. And screenplays are written different from novels. You can't just take a novel and just chop it up and go, oh, interior this, exterior that, and then leave all the description there like that. That's not how you can take the basic plot. They're plotted the same, but you can't take the descriptive part and then just chop it up into and then go, oh, that's a screenplay because they're literally written different. The technical thing of it. I could go into all kinds of various genres. A great thing, I highly recommend is checking out Blake Snyder's Save the Cat stuff because he goes into all the various different genres and what each specific one has. Because every genre has certain specific requirements. The if you don't put them in, you're just kind of letting down your audiences or your readers' expectations. I mean, with fantasy, you're expecting some kind of magic at least to happen. Maybe dwarves and elves or dragons, or whatever, depending on the type of fantasy you're writing or whatever. Sci-fi, you're expecting some kind of advanced technology or this or that, or maybe aliens or something. Or Western, you're expecting some kind of shootout or some 6-shooters and horse riding, and it takes place in the desert or whatever. I mean, every genre has certain expectations that you're gonna have to feed into just to please your readers and stuff like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, you can go. Oh, don't forget to like and subscribe to Heath's channel.
Yes.
By the way, check out his channel.
Thank you. Yes,
please. Missing that. Don't forget to be doing that. But I like my website. If you can go on my website, and I've got tons of free stuff on there, like all the articles on there for free, and they're all about writing in some way, characters, writing, plot, whatever, anything and everything, writing, story, structure, plot, all that stuff. And it's all on there for free. Or you can check out my books tomorrow. All my entire Write Club series is going to be free all day Friday for you guys. And plus my novel Veilfall, the first novel in the Soothsayer series. It's over 300,000 words long. It's a big old chunk of a novel. So you're definitely going to get it. And Kinslayer, that's a lot smaller. So I think it's only like 120,000 words long or something like that, whatever. But I tend to write a lot longer stuff. But one of the reasons why I do is it really gets on my nerves when writers write a trilogy and then they release one book a year for the next 3 years. That's total crap. First of all, I know you wrote the damn trilogy the entire time. Once. It reminds me of game developers. You go on PlayStation Network to go buy a game, and then you get the game, and then 4 months later they come out with DLC, and you play. You spend $25 on the DLC or whatever. And as soon as you play it, you're like, "What the heck? I can tell that this was in the original game. You specifically took it out just to sell it to me later for DLC." That's kind of how I view trilogies. Is you could have just given me the entire trilogy in one sitting. For not all trilogies, obviously, but for most trilogies, they tend to be written all at once, and then they release one book a year for the next 3 years. And then they're doing that to just kind of stretch it out and all that other stuff. I kind of get that, especially from the publisher perspective or whatever. But one of the reasons why my novels tend to be so long is because Veilfall is 353,000 words long. Jinn is 584,000 words long.
Oh, wow.
Powerless is 419,000 words long. One of the reasons why they're so long is I want you to know, my readers, the first 3 books of my Soothsayer series are almost 1.5 million words. And if you chopped them up into regular sized novels, you'd have like 15, 16, 17 novels. So you're really getting a bargain for your money when you're buying my fantasy novels and stuff. But I want you to understand that you're getting a complete story. I can't stand it when I buy a book and then I have to get another book to read it, another book to read it. I want a self-contained story, even if it's part of a series or something like that. So I don't do that to my readers. I'm not going to sell you 1/10 of a freaking story. I don't like that. Because I don't like reading that stuff, so I don't want to do that to people. And One Writing Well, perfect example of how to easily write a book. One Writing Well, I tweaked them here and there when I updated them. I just took all of my previous blogs from, I think, ended like 2 or 3 years ago, so because I'm actually going to be coming out with One Writing Well too. I just took all of my blogs and then put them into a book and arranged them and rearranged them, and I kind of updated and tweaked a couple of them. Yeah, and that's the easiest way to write a book. Come up with a common theme of something you're interested in, and then write a 1,000 word or 1,500 word blog once a week or something like that. After a year, you've got a novel. All you got to do is take all your blogs. A person types 40 words a minute. 25 minutes, you got 1,000 words. In an hour from now, you got over 2,000 words. Right? So there's no reason why you can't just come up with at least a minimum of 1,000 word blog once a week. At the end of the year, that's going to give you a 52,000 word novel, and I guarantee you're going to go over 1,000 words. So you're going to have at least a 52,000 word novel. You know what I mean? And so, let's say you have almost no time. You're a part-time mom with 5 kids to take care of, or someone like you. You got 20 different YouTube channels you're running. You're busy constantly 24 hours a day, so it's hard for you to find time to write. Blog once a week, and at the end of the year, you got a novel. As long as your blog is sharing common themes, you have a book. You could write one book every day or every year for the rest of your entire life like that. And it would take you 20 minutes a week. You know what I mean? So that's kind of blows my mind when I've come across so many people that are like, oh, I've been thinking about writing a book, but I just don't have the time. You can make time. Go to bed half an hour later and wake up half an hour earlier. Now suddenly you have an hour to write every day. Heck, when I decided to start writing and take it seriously, I literally called my cable company, canceled my cable. I took my TV and I put it out in the trash. That was the first thing I did. Now I have no excuse to be sitting there watching TV all day. This is my computer monitor.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, that's something. I mean, maybe I need to do that. The issue that I always had was that, well, now
I'm
I
pretty
can
extreme.
write, but I got to know what to write, and it's your books, it's his books that have been helping out with that a lot. Because if all right, time to write, but I don't know what to write, and I've written a bunch of things that didn't go into places, where it actually get used. So I highly recommend then, like Stomping Kittens. This is a book about getting your plot right and figuring out exactly what it is that you want, because you're big on, like in here, writing this out as an outline. So you're big on the outlining and getting, if you go through all of that procedure, exactly how to do this, and you really put together detailed outlines before you get writing. So if you don't know what to write, he gives you a system for getting your outline done, so you know exactly what your story is, so that when you sit down to write, you actually know what to write.
Yeah, I can. Just so you know, like if you're considering contacting me about novel consultation, I don't care what you have. You have a first draft, a germ of an idea, a finished draft, whatever it is that you have, I can guarantee you I can help you with your story, whatever it is. It's because I've been obsessed with plot for so many years and so much about it. There's nothing that you're going to be able to come at me with in a novel consultation I'm not going to be able to help you with. So whatever you need help with, I can guarantee you. It may take a little bit of time, whatever, but
that's a good place to close. If people do want a novel consultation from you, how do they get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, adronjsmitley.blogspot.com. There's a contact page on there, or you can just email me. I set up an email. It's AJS0, not the word zero, the number zero, AJS0@yahoo.com. And you just, you might want to give me some details or whatever. You're going to want to be prepared for it, because the more prepared for it, if you're paying me $50 an hour or whatever, and that's cheap. Average novel consultation is at least $125 an hour. And you might want to get it now, because eventually I'm going to bump up my prices. I'm probably going to keep it at $100 an hour. Right now it's $50 an hour. And that's a minimum of an hour. If I'm having fun and we're doing a great story, you may pay me $50 for an hour. We may go 3, 4, 5 hours. As you can see, I talk a lot and when I'm interested in something. So, it all depends. But you can just contact me on my website, adronjsmitley.blogspot.com, or AJS0@yahoo.com.
All right.
Shoot me an email.
We'll
figure it out.
All right. That's excellent. So as it turns out, James, you are the winner of the giveaway. So James on here, James Bacon, regular here. You signed up to win, so you got that. I'll connect you to. You might already have the contact information, but I'll contact you because James, you just won. So congratulations. Everybody else, if you want a novel consultation, go there, and then also be sure tomorrow when all of these Write Club series go free on Kindle, to be sure you get them. I meant to have some of the physical. I've got some of the physical books. I always like to. But I don't know where they're sitting. I always like to reference the physical books when I'm actually writing. But definitely get the Kindles tomorrow when they are free. Adron, thank you so much for being with us tonight. This was incredible. I had such a great time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on, Heath. I owe you so many thanks, because you didn't have to be covered in any of my books or have me on or anything like that. You're giving me all this exposure and helping getting this information out there to other writers. So I tremendously thank you. You don't have any need to thank me. I appreciate it, but thank you so much. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe.
I guess that is something else that we could say.
I should have been saying it earlier.
I guess that's another thing we could say, that if you want to know whether or not these books are for you, they're going to be free tomorrow, so you might as well pick them up. But if you want to hear a discussion about the books, I did go over basically all of the books in the Write series. Not the entire book. We didn't have time to go over the entire book, but we basically started with each book. So you're going to see what the book is about, hear the discussion about it. If you look up any of those books, like Stomping Kittens, Morning Grind, the name of my morning show is The Morning Grind. So look up Stomping Kittens, Morning Grind, Punching Babies, Morning Grind, and you'll get into a conversation with us, and also hear about what the book, and see if it's actually for you. All right, everybody, have a wonderful evening. I had a great discussion. I had a great time discussing this with you. I had a great time with the chat. Thank you to everybody who was here live. Thank you to everybody who's going to watch here on replay. I hope this information is really useful to everybody out there. And I will see you tomorrow for the Morning Grind, 9:30 Central on the Heath Geekverse channel. So later, everybody, go forth and be creative. Go do some writing tonight.